Morning. I'm wondering if the interpreters could please speak on the English channel.
Yes, this is the English channel. This is the interpreter today. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Sound check, check, sound check. Can you hear me? Eric, can you hear me? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. This is a sound check. 1, 2, 1, 2. Sound check, 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 sound check.
That's good, thank you.
This
If the interpreter
perfect.
could please speak on the French channel. That's great. Thank you so much.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Morning, Glenn. Good morning, everyone.
It's going to be a long meeting. I'm going to go replenish my cup of coffee before we get going.
Good idea.
Good idea. Morning,
Morning,
Sean.
How are you?
Good.
You watched
Tried
that
to
game
do
last?
some, extra stretches.
Oh yeah.
Sorry?
I was just gonna say, did you watch that game last night?
We did.
I'm lagging a bit here over on my end. Sorry if I'm choppy or something here.
It's probably me, to be honest.
I slept on the couch last night though, so there's that. I was like, I need some stretching too this morning. It was a terrible night.
Oh,
Dare I
no.
ask?
Yeah.
No problems otherwise. Just couldn't
Is
sleep.
everything okay?
I wasn't kicked out or anything, but
All right, we are going to start in 1 minute or less. I see we do have quorum, so good morning. Bonjour tout le monde. I think we should begin. It's a long day ahead. Il est important de souligner que la ville d'Ottawa est
It is important to say that Ottawa, the city of Ottawa is on an unceded traditional land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin.
Territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. I'd like to honor the land and the peoples of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation whose ancestors have lived on this territory for millennia and whose culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9 on today's agenda. For the items mentioned, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Land Tribunal if council does not adopt an amendment within 90 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 120 days for an official plan amendment. To submit written comments on these amendments prior to their consideration by City Council on July 21st, please email or call the committee or council coordinator. And a note to committee members, if you have any motions for the items listed today that you've yet to share with the clerk or with the committee, please do circulate those so we're aware of them. We have regrets this morning from Councillor Brockington. We have a long meeting ahead. I just want to remind committee members our quorum today is 5 members, so we do need 5 members at all times on the committee. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Seeing none. Confirmation of minutes. The minutes for June 24th, 2021. Are the minutes approved? Carried?
Carried.
Thank you.
Carried.
Okay, let's go through our agenda. We have
Just to note, Mr. Chair, you haven't done the roll call.
You're right. I haven't.
Just saying.
Thank you, Councillor Cloutier. Melody, can you run through the roll call, please?
Sure. Councillor Brockington, regrets. Councillor Cloutier,
Présent.
Councillor Dudas. Easy. Councillor Hughley.
Here.
Councillor Kitts. Yes. Councillor Leeper.
Here.
Good morning.
Councillor Moffat.
Here.
Councillor Suds.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present.
Councillor El-Shantiri? No. And acting chair.
Here.
You have quorum.
Thank you. Okay, we have delegations on many of the items. So let's go through one by one and we'll figure out which ones we need to hold. First on the agenda is zoning bylaw amendment for 30-48 Chamberlain Avenue, and we do have delegations, so we will hold that item. The second item on the agenda is the site plan control for 6588 Carrière Street. This is the Dome, and we have 24 delegations and then 2 delegations from the applicant. So we'll be holding this one. Item number 3 is site plan control for 257 MacArthur Avenue, and there are delegations and the applicant. So we will hold this one as well.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, would it be possible to move that item ahead of the 27 delegations? I view it as pretty minor.
Yeah, so what I'm actually going to propose, if I can get the concurrence from the committee, is that we hold the Carrière Street to the end. Given the number of delegations, if we're able to put that to the end, it means we can deal with, we can consider all the other items and let the delegations and staff have their chance to participate, and then we can keep the Carrière item to the very end, if committee would agree with that. Well, we'll continue through the items. So official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 1335 and 1339 Bank Street. There are delegations, so we'll hold that item. Number 5 is official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 403 Richmond Road and 389 Roosevelt Avenue. So again, that's a hold with delegations for that item. Number 6, official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment for 19 Centerpoint Drive. There are delegations for this item, so we will hold that. Item number 7 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 6321 Renault Road. There are no delegations, but the applicant is signed up. Now, Barrett Wager from Stantec, if the committee's ready to carry this item, Barrett, do you need to speak on it today?
No, Mr. Chair. We'd be fine to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Is this item carried?
I'm
dissenting.
Okay, carried with dissent from Councillor Dudas. Thank you. Item number 8 is a zoning bylaw amendment for 3455 Hawthorne Road. There are no public delegations. The applicant is available to speak or answer questions. On this one, if the committee is prepared to carry this one, we have Miguel Tremblay and Nick Sutherland. Do either of you need to speak on this item? And are there any councillor questions for this one?
We can answer questions, but we don't need to speak, no.
Okay. Is this item carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay, item number 9 is zoning bylaw amendment 3604 Innes Road. I believe there's a motion here to defer this to the August meeting. Is this a motion from Councillor Dudas?
Yes, we do have a motion. Could staff please put it up on the screen? Thank you. Whereas the applicant has requested that to staff that the report be deferred to the August 2021 regular meeting of Planning Committee to allow additional time to confirm engineering considerations. And where staff have no objection to the requested deferral, therefore be it resolved that Planning Committee defer the report until the August 26, 2021 regular meeting of Planning Committee, and be it further resolved that there be no further notice pursuant to subsection 3417 of the Planning Act.
Okay, is the deferral motion carried?
Carried.
Carried. Okay. There are a few other items on the agenda, IPDs and motions of which notice have been previously given. We will deal with those at the end of the meeting, as we usually do for committee and council procedure. Okay,
Chair?
so we've got a,
Acting
yes.
Chair, sorry, just to interrupt. You do have the applicant present on item 9, if they wanted to give a comment on the deferral.
Okay, thank you. I know from advanced conversations, the applicant is, I believe, the one who's even requested that deferral, but James Ireland and Gillian Norman, do you have any comments before we move on?
You're on mute, James.
Ireland, we can't hear you.
Better?
Yes.
Yeah, that's better.
We have no comments. We support the deferral. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so as I said, we are going to move back to the items we've held, and we're going to deal with the site plan control, item number 2, at the end of the meeting. So we've got quite a few delegations in the other items, so I imagine we'll be probably at least 90 minutes, perhaps more, before we get to the 6588 Carriere Street. So we're going back to item number 1. This is a zoning bylaw amendment for 30-48 Chamberlain Avenue. We have a number of public delegations. The first 4 who have signed up are Rena Serrato and David Schwartz, Todd Saunders, Andrea Redway, and Christy Ross, who have indicated they'd like to make a presentation together. So as usual for our committee meetings, we have a 5-minute limit on delegations, and given the number of delegations and items today, we will be sticking strictly to that. So Melody has her stopwatch ready to time. I'm not sure who from this group is intending to speak first. Is it Rena and David, or one of the other members here?
Chair, can I just on Carriere, knowing that we're asking them to wait, they would have gone second normally. Do you want to just suggest that maybe we don't start that item before noon, so that those folks who are delegations on that item know they don't have to sit here and watch for 2 hours while we don't talk about their item? Because it looks like, if you look at the agenda, it looks like we likely will get to noon anyway.
Yeah,
so at least it gives them some certainty on when to come back, and that we won't start that item before that time.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And in the event that we did end earlier than that, we could take a short recess.
Right, exactly.
So on the Carriere.
We can only hope that the other items are done before noon.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you.
Okay,
Chair,
so
just
let's
on,
begin with.
Sorry, Chair, just on the first item here with the, there's multiple delegations that have signed up. I think there's 5 of them in total. They may go over their 5 minutes, not each, but in total. And I know our practice in the past has been, okay, if there's 5 of them and they all want to speak together, they can each have that time. But I think they may have a little bit of a longer presentation than 5 minutes, because there is 5 of them. They could have each signed up separately, but they chose to do it together to be more efficient. So just with your indulgence, hoping that we can get it, if there's a couple extra minutes they need to get through the presentation, that would make sense.
Yeah, and we're aware of that in advance too. So thank you, Councillor Menard. So Rena, I believe we're starting with you.
You are. Hi. Hello. Good morning, committee members. Thank you for this opportunity to present our case to reject the application for 3048 Chamberlain Street development. My name is Rena Serrato. I am a resident on Rosebury Avenue, and I am joined here today by my neighbors, Todd Saunders and Andrea Redway. We are presenting on behalf of all of our neighbors. Next slide, please. I would like to welcome you to Rosebury Avenue. We are a street zoned R3P. Next slide. Rosebury Avenue is a no exit street between Lyon and Bank and borders Central Park on the south. Rosebury is made up of residential homes and multi-generational homes. Some homes have been in the same family for generations. Next slide. We are a community-oriented street. We help each other out and we celebrate each other's successes. Next slide. The Rosebury residents would like to state that we support the concept of intensification that is sensitive to the community. We want to see the site developed with thoughtful design that creates inclusive 15-minute neighborhoods. We support the recommendation in the City of Ottawa Bank Street in the Glebe Height and Character Study to increase the maximum height at the site to 6 stories to allow for intensification within the character of the neighborhood. In this study, the Planning Policy Department undertook a thorough assessment of the site, its location in the community, and the buildings around it, applied the planning policies and guidelines, and reached a very different conclusion than the proposal. These findings are being ignored. We oppose the current proposal to develop a 16-story building on a site clearly deemed for a mid-rise. We feel the report recommending approval has been selective and did not follow all the application planning policies and guidelines that must be considered for the site. such as sections 2.51 and 2.56 of the official plan, which are quoted in the executive summary of the staff report. These sections require development to coexist without adverse impact and require detailed attention to urban design and minimizing impact on the existing communities into which they are located. Next slide, please. The proposed development is for a 16-story high-rise on a 30.5 meter deep lot, according to page 12 of the report. However, it is actually only 27.6 meters when you take into consideration additional setbacks required for future road modifications and the Chamberlain multi-use path. A 27.6 meter lot abutting low-rise residential homes in an R3P zone. I asked the committee to visualize how a building of that size, including a 2-level parking lot, fits here just on size alone. Next slide. I also asked that you consider whether the urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings are being applied in this assessment. Sections such as 1.13, which requires an angular plane, typically of 45 degrees, to allow transition from high-rise to low-scale areas, as you can see in that top diagram. Section 2.29, which requires the tower to step back 3 meters, or at least 1.5 meters from the base, not 50 centimeters. Next slide, please. Sections 1.17a and 1.17b, which require a minimum 20-meter tower setback from abutting low-rise residential properties, or at least enough to follow the angular plane. These guidelines are to be used in the preparation and review of development proposals to achieve official plan objectives. The staff report mentions these guidelines, but applied some and ignored others. For example, the planning department recommended that the applicant increase the setback from the internal side yard to 10 meters to make room for a hypothetical future tower. However, the rear yard setback was only increased by 50 centimeters or 0.5 meters, resulting in a tower being located only 8 meters from actual existing low-rise residential buildings. This proposed development will not coexist with the surroundings and will not minimize the impact as required by the official plan. It will do the opposite. Thank you. I will now pass on to my neighbor, Todd.
Good morning. I'm Todd Saunders. I live at 45 Rosebury Avenue. The planning department would like to convey that the proposed development will coexist with the surroundings and minimize impact, but that is not the case. This development would impact everyone in the surrounding area, but no one more so than those of us directly behind the tower. 5 of the 7 properties are owner-occupied homes, including the 3 properties where the tower will be placed. These are multi-generational homes. These are properties that have invested significant time, money, and effort into their homes. This tower will have a profound impact on all of us, and we will be adversely affected by shadow and privacy and overlook. There is no transition as per the high-rise guidelines. Instead, a 16-story mass is proposed, a mere 8 meters from our back fences, creating an abrupt rather than gradual transition. The development will not animate the Rosebury streetscape, but will loom over it. Next slide, please. The impact of this tower and the lack of transition has an impact beyond our backyards. The shadow may be minimal in the summer, limited to Rosebury Avenue, and the applicant argues that it's better than a 6-story. However, in the summer, some homes will be entirely in shadow for part of the day, something that would not result from a 6-story building. In addition, the shadowing is very different for the rest of the year, especially in the fall when the shadow extends down Rosebury, past Bank Street, and into the southeast streets like Strathcona. Next slide, please. To compare, here is the shadow of a 6-story versus the current proposal. Note that the imagined 6-story building does not show a building that steps back after the 4th floor as per the angular 45-degree plane, so the shadows are exaggerated. Regardless, the impact of the shadow of the current proposal is significantly greater. Dear members of the committee, we bought and developed our houses in good faith knowing that the adjacent property was zoned for 14 meters. We knew the site was to be developed eventually, and we welcome it being developed appropriately. However, we fear there are many important pieces being overlooked, including the conclusions and recommendation of the city's planning policy department in the development of the Bank Street Height and Character Study, which recommended that a 6-story height stepped back at the 4th story be the height maximum for this site. These recommendations are clearly not reflected in this recommended proposal to approve the development for 16 stories. The planning department acknowledges in their staff report that the property is located at 39 to 47 Rosebury Avenue, which means 4 of the 7 properties impacted, and mainly numbers 43 and 45, and I quote, will not benefit from the Mass 14 relief or from the overlooking window relief, as they will be aligned with the tower. They continue by saying, it does coincidentally happen that these properties have a generous, large, mature tree canopy along the rear property line, therefore helping to mitigate the tower proximity. So they acknowledge that this tower and its proximity will impact many of the residential properties and thus needs to be mitigated. The tree canopy they say will mitigate these issues is made up of deciduous trees. The trees might offer some relief from the lower towers for 5 months of the year, but we will all be laid bare to 16 stories for the remainder of the year. It should also be noted that while the application does not meet the requirements, and it does have a profound impact on the residents, it does not propose the addition of any landscaping or evergreen landscape to mitigate the adverse impacts of overlook or screen the new development in any way. Any mitigation of the impacts of this project falls solely on the impacted residents. The planning department acknowledges that this tower does not follow the guidelines and will result in reduced privacy for us, which goes against section 4.11 of policy 14 of the official plan that says high-rise buildings should be designed to reduce impact associated with privacy for adjacent lots. This proposal instead increases the impact on the existing neighbors. Thank you. Now over to our neighbor, Andrea Redway.
Good morning. My name is Andrea Redway, and I live at 34 Rosebury Avenue. I fully support the points made by my neighbors this morning. I'd like to spend a few minutes highlighting the contradictions between the application before you and all of the work that the city has undertaken over the past 3 years to develop a new vision and master framework in the form of the draft official plan to guide the city's growth and development for the next 25 years. First of all, I commend City Council and all of the city staff involved in developing the draft official plan for their intensive work and for taking the time to listen to the concerns of residents and making efforts to address them in the revisions that are being presented this summer. There is no doubt that further intensification is needed to accommodate the expected population growth and that every neighborhood will be impacted. In fact, as you know, the impact of population growth is already being felt across the city, and many residents have raised concerns about the predictability and certainty of the planning process in recent years. Next slide, please. It's for this reason, to ensure a more predictable planning process to manage intensification and growth, that the Bank Street and the Glebe Height and Character Study was undertaken starting in late 2018 by the city's policy department in consultation with the local residents and community association. After an extensive 2.5-year process that reviewed the neighborhood context, lot dimensions, scale and built form, urban design attributes, retail characteristics, development potential, and potential lot consolidations, city staff concluded that the maximum appropriate height for the site of 30 to 48 Chamberlain is 6 stories. The application before you today was submitted in late 2020, shortly after this study was concluded. And yet in a few short months, the planning department has come to a very different conclusion by recommending a 16-story building at 30 to 48 Chamberlain. How can this be possible? And how can residents rely on engaging in these types of consultative processes if this is the result? Next slide, please. The third big policy move in the draft official plan recognizes that, and I quote, Ottawa is a city of neighborhoods and villages. And it further states that each of these neighborhoods and villages have their own characteristics that make them different from each other. And it further makes the commitment that this plan will reflect the differences in Ottawa's neighborhoods. We need to protect our heritage neighborhoods, neighborhoods that are already vibrant 15-minute neighborhoods with many nearby amenities and services and well-integrated green space that is embraced by the local community. The new draft official plan states that 15-minute neighborhoods should create a sense of place and character by integrating high-quality, human-scale urban design. A 16-story high-rise building towering over neighboring residents in Central Park West will clearly take the character of the neighborhood in exactly the opposite direction. We will begin to lose the character of what is now a vibrant, walkable, community-friendly residential neighborhood. More high-rises will follow. This is neither human-scale urban design in keeping with the character of the neighborhood, nor the kind of strategic urban design described in the draft official plan. Nor does it conform to the current official plan policies that require that new development fit with, complement, and enhance existing communities and not adversely impact them. Next slide, please. To conclude, we are calling on the city, both staff and council, to showcase better planning processes, starting now with this decision and moving forward with the new official plan. We want a diverse, vibrant, eco-friendly city. Planning decisions should set a standard to preserve and enhance existing neighborhoods that make the city what it is today and the city that it wants to be in the future. High-rise buildings squeezed onto small lots with non-compliant setbacks only a few meters from residential properties and well-used neighborhood parks do not meet this standard. We respectfully request that you reject this application. But that being said, we would be open to further discussions for an appropriate mid-rise development. Thank you very much.
Good morning, committee members. My name is Christy Ross, and I'm a land use planner, and I'm making comments today on behalf of the Rosebury Residents Group. I'm providing the planning law context to support the visuals presented and make the case that the site should be mid-rise rather than high-rise. Next slide, please. So first, I'd like to start with how the official plan works. Section 5.4 Policy 1 of the official plan requires that the plan be read as a whole. However, in some cases, the applicable official plan policies have been ignored while others have not been given the proper weight. Next slide, please. Policies 2.2 sub 11 and 3.6.14 provide that new taller buildings may, I emphasize that, be considered for sites that front on an interior road or a transit priority corridor such as Chamberlain Avenue. First, a taller building does not necessarily equate to a high-rise use. Second, policy 2.2 sub 11 mandates that greater heights can only be sought if it is demonstrated that they are compatible with the surrounding existing context, as well as section 4.11 of the official plan. Chamberlain is designated as a transit priority corridor. However, it is designated as one with isolated measures, which means a lower transit priority, thus supporting a lower degree of intensification. Ottawa's Transportation Master Plan states that the official plan promotes modest intensification in the form of mid-rise buildings in most transit priority corridors. Thus, the policies on transit priority should not be given more weight than the compatibility policies, and additional height cannot be supported unless compatibility and adequate transition is demonstrated. Next slide, please. Sections 2.5.1 and 2.5.6 of the official plan state that compatible development means that that it must enhance an established community and coexist with existing development without causing undue adverse effect and impact on surrounding properties. Undue adverse impact can be demonstrated here, and I refer you back to the shadow studies that were presented by Todd, showing that the 16-story building is far more impactful than a mid-rise one. There are also issues with respect to overlook and loss of privacy. Moving on to section 411, policy 5. This policy notes that achieving compatibility should focus on the aspect of the proposed building that is adjacent to the existing buildings. Thus, in this case, the focus should be on how the development interacts with the Rosebury homes. However, it is these homes that face a tower with minimal setbacks and stepbacks in violation of a number of policies in 4.11 of the official plan, while the building's front yard and side yard setbacks are in compliance with zoning and other policies. Next slide, please. Key aspects of the high-rise guideline have been ignored. The official plan provides when there is no approved secondary plan, so that would be the case in this instance, the city will, and I emphasize will, assess the appropriateness of the proposal relying on its approved design guidelines. So in this case, the high-rise guidelines are applicable, and the use of the term will assess signifies a duty on behalf of the city to apply them. The guidelines provide, and I've laid them out in this chart, a setback between the tower and adjacent low-rise area, either of 20 meters or the application of a 45-degree angular plane. The application provides neither of these elements, instead proposing an 8-meter setback between the tower and the backyards of the Rosebury homes. Further, the guidelines recommend a 3-meter tower step back from the base, and at a minimum notes a 1.5-meter setback. Once again, the applicant does not provide this, instead providing 50 centimeters. Next slide, please. While the Bank Street height and character study is not an approved secondary plan, the conclusions in this study are relevant. The city planners applied current official plan policies and the high-rise guidelines to determine that 6 stories was the appropriate height for this site. The city's planning staff explained the reasoning for this conclusion at a public open house on this application. There were 3 reasons for this. The first was the shallowness of the lands. The second was the need to apply the compatibility and transition policies in the official plan. And in the words of planning staff, Rosebury has a sensitive condition that needs to be protected. Finally, a 45-degree angular plane was recommended for the site in order to ensure appropriate transition to Rosebury. All of these factors point to the conclusion in the study that the site is appropriate for mid-rise development, but that high-rise development is not appropriate for the site. We request that this committee refuse the application on those grounds, and we thank you for your time, subject to any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you, everyone. So because this group spoke together, I'll give committee members an opportunity to ask questions too, and with the first 4 speakers at this time. Not sure who had the hand up first. Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. I wanted to ask to the residents specifically, to Rena first, if they attended, there was one public consultation on this, and if Rena, if you were in attendance, and what was communicated to you by city staff at that one open public consultation?
Yes, I did attend the meeting. What was conveyed at that meeting, at least our understanding, is that the city felt that the proposal was not appropriate for that site. It was our understanding that there was the numerous considerations from like the policy department, provide the reasoning as to why having a 16-story building there would not have been appropriate because of the residences. It's really close to our residences. So that was our understanding in the process. It was also our understanding during this meeting that the city had undertaken significant analysis and assessment of the different policies and the guidelines that would allow for a different story a different type of building, a different mid-rise level.
Yeah, okay, great. That is my recollection as well. My next question is to Christy. Christy, I think you've gone through some of the policy rationale under the current official plan and why it doesn't meet the current official plan standards. I also wonder if you can go into some of the application itself. It appears that as you were reviewing the documentation provided by the development team that formed a complete application, there may have been some technical error in the application for rezoning, and if you could just expand on that.
Certainly, Councillor Menard. So when I reviewed the application and sort of what it was that the applicant was seeking, which is essentially an amendment to the parent GM4 zone to allow added height to permit up to a 16-story building, which would of course be a high-rise building within sort of the official plan designation of heights and whatnot. I noticed that there was an amendment sought simply to the parent zoning, but the parent zoning itself does not permit sort of the term of art in the zoning bylaw, which is apartment dwelling high rise. There had been no sort of request for that land use planning use. So there had been a request for the height, but not for the use. So I thought that was technically incorrect and a little bit strange from a planning law perspective. It's important to have both performance standards, which would be, the height and massing and the setbacks and all of those things. But one always has to, at land use planning law, have the use specified as well. So I would have thought that there would have been an application in addition to what they were seeking to add that land use of apartment dwelling high rise as well. And I would think that that may require some additional notice in that having sort of a high-rise dwelling is perhaps different and sort of more significant than simply amending the performance standards. So this is a comment I made to planning staff, but I haven't received sort of a response as to whether or not some sort of amendment to the application is required.
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you for being here. I'll let my other colleagues ask questions.
Okay, Councillor Leap.
Thanks, Chair. I'll be relatively brief. Good morning, Ms. Ross. Good to see you as always. If I may play devil's advocate for a moment with respect to the setback to the rear property line, I am concerned that I just want to make sure I understand properly. Is your argument that there always needs to be 20 meters? And I'm trying to remember the assertion from the presentation. We are approving buildings on arterial main streets that are high rises, oftentimes with sort of a minimum non-negotiable 7.5 meter setback to the properties in behind. Is insisting on a bigger setback here comment on that approach that the city has been taking and council's been taking to this point?
Well, I think I'd like to make a couple of points first, if I may. So I note that this is not an arterial main street. I mean, I guess the one that's in this ward and most relevant would be Carling Avenue. Certainly is an arterial main street. This is simply a arterial road. So I think that there are some sort of different policy considerations for those two different sort of designations. The official plan is pretty clear for arterial main streets of noting that that would be a site that additional height, I mean, as I believe on arterial main street, 9 stories is permitted as a right. And then there's sort of some criteria that need to be applied to sort of bump one up to a high-rise use. So I would argue that high-rise uses are contemplated and there's clear official plan standards for that use. This is a slightly different site. So I think that would be point number 1. And point number 2 is the way I read the guidelines is either a 20 meter requirement sort of in like the downtown core, or alternatively, and that's sort of how I present it, a 45-degree angular plane. So I think there's a recognition that one can't always have 20 meters. And the reason that I'm sort of making this argument is when the planners who engaged in the Bank Street height and character study looked at the site, they very carefully noted sort of the character and the narrowness of the lot as sort of their two factors, and suggested that anything less than a 45-degree anchor point on this site would be inappropriate. So that would not necessarily get us at a 20-meter setback. And that certainly isn't possible on a site that only has 27.6 meters of developmental capacity. However, it would translate to sort of four stories up and then a slightly more significant step back, I would argue, than 0.5 meters, and then it would go, up again. And that would lead you and land you somewhere in the mid-rise category, not in the high-rise category. So I think that's the argument. I think intensification at this site is a good idea, but I think that intensification, just applying all of the official plans and the site considerations, would be mid-rise, not high-rise.
That's helpful. Thank you. I think, sorry, in terms of my second question, clearly you're working on behalf of the residents. I'm assuming the residents are prepared to challenge council's decision if it is in favor of approving the development at the tribunal. Can you just take me through how you see that challenge going? I'm going to guess that you have, since you're here, a fairly high degree of confidence that residents can win that challenge.
Well, I think my assessment on that is that there are some clear official plan policies that I don't believe have been applied here. So I think, obviously all of the compatibility policies, I think are first and foremost in my mind. So section 4.1 and 2.5.11, 2.5.1 and 4.11, if I can restate that. But then I think another key aspect in this case is how the high-rise guidelines should be applied in this case. My interpretation of section 411 sub 10 is that because there is no approved secondary plan in this instance yet, there's certainly a draft one, but it hasn't been approved. There's a requirement that the city will apply the high-rise guidelines, and I think they've applied some of them, as I think Irina mentioned. There's with compliance with sort of a side yard setback to a future potential tower, but there's been less willingness to move this either away from the residents by pushing it forward on the lot, or to scale back on height so that one can have that 45-degree angle to plane. So for me, that is a fairly clear indication of non-conformity with the official plan, and that's what you need as grounds at LPAT to be successful.
How backed up is the tribunal these days?
It's quite backed up. I'm having a lot of trouble scheduling a lot of my other aspects, and I'm having trouble even just getting responses. So I would view that as quite backed up, and hearings that you would think would take 6 months are taking, far longer.
Yep. I think the developer may want to take that into consideration with respect to persisting with this application. Thank you very much, Ms. Ross. I'll turn it back over to the chair.
Okay, thank you. I see Councillor Menard has his hand back up. If you have a quick question, go ahead, Councillor Menard.
Sorry, Chair. I know I said I was done. There's just one very quick question, and it is with regard to negotiation. And so just a question to Christy is, are you and the residents willing to negotiate? Have you been willing to negotiate to come to a better compromise on this issue throughout this process?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that is by far the most efficient and sensible way of proceeding with items. And I think this is one of those situations where having buy-in from the community would be, I think, really important. And so we have had lots of conversations with the developer and the city, and we thank both parties for engaging in those with us. But we have suggested ways of mitigating some of the adverse impacts, both in terms of overlook, privacy, as well as some of the shadowing that extends all the way to sort of Bank Street and Strathcona with a lower built form. And just one sort of aspect or possibility that we put on the table was, reallocating the density in a more modest sense. Clearly, the guidelines permit, and the staff report noted that sort of a bar building in sort of a mid-rise form. I believe the staff report said that would be compliant with all policies and guidelines. We agree with that. And that would be our first preference. However, we also sort of put on the table the idea of allocating that density in a different built form. So you have the same density, but you position it otherwise. We'd be willing to, obviously look at positioning on the site once again to mitigate the adverse impact and the closeness and proximity to the neighbors. So we'd be 100% willing to engage in those discussions and would open them with open arms.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So kind of that bar building going up, but with the same density and RFI. That's appreciated. Thank you very much, Chair.
Okay, thank you. We have 3 more individuals who are making presentations. We have Ian Charlebois up first, and then followed by Ian will be Andrea Chandler and Carolyn Mckenzie. Ian, are you with us this morning?
Yes, I am.
All right, go ahead, Ian.
I'm just going to merely comment with regards to my support into the development. I'm the adjacent neighbor over on the west side of this proposed application. In particular, obviously, the glebe is a beautiful part of the city. The zoning changes that were implemented with the new city plan is one avenue that has been kind of consistent with the future growth of the city. Now we have a heightened character study that references Bank Street, but Chamberlain is not on Bank Street. It abuts to it and crosses over and through Isabel. But yet we're seeing developments on the corners of Bank Street at the end on the north near the highway that reference 23 stories or 14 stories, but yet Chamberlain is kind of being isolated as a 6-story. It is my opinion, if it goes to 6-story and has this idea of reallocation of density, it will become like a warehouse. And when you go through major cities throughout the world, often abutting highways or facing highways is striking buildings that are at, quite frankly, heights over 10 feet, 12 feet, 14 feet. So, in my belief, I believe it's kind of a stance where the residents are not in line with what's happening or what will happen on Isabel, because they believe it's a different situation or a different venue in comparison to their property in particular. I've taken a couple of notes from the comments that I've heard thus far, and I guess my ultimate point is, we're trying to become a vibrant city, have a 15-minute neighborhood. Yes, the glebe is, but the affordability of the city without alternatives as rentals will become limited. And this is almost the second richest neighborhood in the city. So I have concerns with it being vibrant and affordable for the future if we don't have plausible solutions through intensification and density with buildings as such as this. This is not a small parcel. This is 240 feet inside the city's core as frontage. So I believe finding something suitable now is the time to do it. And from what I read in the new official plan, we spent a lot of time in the city to come up with points and references and these ideas of where the city needs to go. But yet here we have this heightened character study that I wasn't presented as a resident, as a private resident, and engaged on what the suggested heights should be. But yet I'm told that I can only go, or the development should only be able to go up to 6 stories. If I wasn't consulted prior to 2018, I'm uncertain as to how that can be implemented in comparison to other parts of the city that are going up in heights. I also own a property on Smythe Road, and that's going to 9 stories in the portion of Elmvale, but it is going to 4 stories only in the portion of Alta Vista. So it seems to me that like the resources being put forth is location specific, which I have a problem with, because if we're going on the new official plan that we put forth and we put tax money into and really tried to create as a platform to coexist in the future for the next 30 years, why are we having these kind of sub
1 minute
paper comes in, or these sub categories come in with regards to a contradiction to what I believe is the new official plan, which is very clean and appropriate for the future of the city should look like. That's good. Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Ian. You have a question from Councillor Menard.
Very much, Chair. Thanks for being here. Ian, you own property in the area on which street?
I'm on 52 Chamberlain Avenue. I abut the applicant's property.
Okay. And if that upzoning occurred for you, you'd be able to put up a potentially larger building there.
I would be able to put up a suitable property that I purchased it with its original intention going forward, of course, yes. But at the same time, the driver has never been what my interest is over the communities. And, as a property owner, you want the best for the community, but you want something suitable to be appropriate for what I want to live in as a resident. So, if your point is to drive on what he gets, I can get, my parcel doesn't even probably like size wise, can't be as such as 240 feet. I mean, you have a great opportunity to make something right here and to go as high as you can to make it appropriate for the community at large. I mean, that's my opinion, and whether it's suitable for me to say it as a primary owner that I won't benefit, certainly, yeah. I mean, that is your point, I guess, but it doesn't necessarily change why I ultimately ended up in the Glebe, because I love that part of the city. I'm a resident from birth, and I chose to end up there because I knew that's where I wanted to live, and my decisions aren't being based on financial gain.
No, I understood, and just want to clarify. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Ian. Next speaker is Andrea Chandler. Good morning, Andrea.
Good morning. Thank you for allowing me to present. I'm a resident of Capitol Ward. I do not live in the immediate vicinity of Chamberlain Avenue, but I ride a bicycle daily for transportation as well as leisure. I also drive a car, by the way. I live in Old Ottawa East, east of the canal, a neighborhood which has changed greatly in the time I've lived there. I lived near the Greystone development and Lansdowne Park, both of which showed room for improvement in terms of their consultation with the community. I would also add that during the pandemic, I have almost daily walked or biked around the city. It's been evident that many people and businesses have fallen on hard times. So now would seem to be an important moment for planning in this city to be oriented towards all the people, including the unhoused, and to be sustainable and as safe as possible for all modes of transportation. Regarding the proposed development on Chamberlain Avenue is located in the Glebe, or at the edge of the Glebe, near parks and schools. And this road is a scary place for a cyclist, especially the hair-raising Chamberlain and Kent intersection. I do not see how adding a high rise is going to help the safety of cyclists and pedestrians. This avenue is a potential bike route home for students attending Glebe High School, as well as people such as myself who bike around the city. The proposed development appears to include room for a lot of car parking. What steps would be taken to ensure that cyclists and pedestrians are not cut off by residents entering and exiting the building? Providing money for traffic calming does not necessarily guarantee that such measures will be able to keep up with increased traffic. Nor do I see how the building would promote affordable housing, since the generous car parking plan suggests a fairly affluent set of residents. The same problem, by the way, seems to apply with the later proposed agenda item for the Bank and Riverside development, which is outside of Capitol Ward, but near enough for me to drive, cycle, and walk regularly. Crossing Bank Street south of Riverside on foot is a scary proposition, and it's extra important that this location be safe because of its close proximity to medical offices and other healthcare facilities. Since the spring of this year, I've had multiple negative experiences as a law-abiding cyclist in Capital Ward and other central areas in the city, where I have felt more unsafe than ever before because of driver behavior. It's not just a question of providing bike lanes. It is also about what kind of culture are we creating in Ottawa? Is there a culture of sustainable coexistence between people with diverse ways of life? As a voter and taxpayer, I would like to see planning that really considers affordable housing, sustainability, and safety to be just as important as building more buildings. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrea. There's a question from Councillor Menard.
Just very quick, Chair. I just want to thank the delegation for being here, and I will raise the question around affordable housing in this development. My understanding is there's not slated for that, but I will raise that question as you've raised it. And Chamberlain is supposed to be redone eventually. There's no funding for it now, and full design still awaiting the actual funding to execute it. But eventually it will have separated bike lanes there, and that's part of why the setback on this building would be more than what the lot currently allows for, to ensure that there is that connectivity. And I take your point about the culture in the city and ensuring that all modes of transportation are respected, with safety first and foremost in mind. So I very much appreciate you being here.
Okay, seeing no more questions. Thanks very much, Andrea, for your presentation. We have Carolyn Mckenzie here this morning. Good morning, Carolyn.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. I've listened carefully. I'm not going to belabor on many of the points that were well articulated already. But I did want to comment on the Bank Street Height and Character Study, which I fully realize does not have the standing of the official plan here. It's still waiting to come to this committee for reasons which I don't actually quite understand. But in any case, it is important context, though. This committee supported the study after 2 significant projects on Bank Street and the Glebe that are now currently being built, happy to say. The key idea here for the study was to have a policy discussion with all stakeholders out in the open. The idea was to set the rules so we could avoid debates that are time-consuming and divisive for all of us, community members, industry, etc., and to allow development to move forward. But this has not happened, unfortunately. After 2 years, draft study recommendations, including the 6 stories that has already been referred to on the site, were presented to the public last October at a public info session this past winter. For this application, staff gave even more detail about the rationale for a maximum of 6 stories and why a high-rise was not appropriate nor consistent with the current official plan. The GCA supports the study recommendations that include mid-rise and high-rise along the north sections of the study area, as well as 6 stories backing onto the Heritage Conservation District. We are not against intensification. We support appropriate intensification that follows official plan policies, including policies that relate to context and compatibility. But this application, early on, the key author of the city's high-rise guidelines stated, in short, this proposal does not currently meet a number of the items outlined in the high-rise guidelines regarding tower separation and transition. The city's file has given more detailed feedback, listing a number of significant concerns about the massing and transition of the building. The clear reading was that this application would not be supported. Since then, no significant changes have been made to address transition and massing, unless, of course, you count moving the tower to accommodate a future tower to the east, which we do not. Now, I'm not here to argue that every high-rise guideline has to be met for an application to succeed, but massing and transition items are key elements of these guidelines, and this application does not even come close. Recently, I was told by staff that these guidelines are not policy, which I understand, but simply nice to have. The staff report states that these guidelines can provide guidance in addressing compatibility. They can provide guidance. These 2 points together tell me that the city believes it has the option to essentially ignore the guidelines. I don't believe this is consistent with policy 10 of the OP. And I wonder what confidence anyone should have regarding nice words in this OP or the next one about how the city will take into account neighborhood context and compatibility issues or give due regard to guidelines if they can be so easily ignored. There's another fundamental problem with staff support for this application, in my opinion. On page 13, regarding building transition massing, the report states that a mid-rise building would, and I quote, pose negative planning consequences on the properties to the south, the residents on Rosebury. The report continues stating that starting from that observation, staff looked more closely at the potential proximity of mass and compared different scenarios for its redistribution. I think this is a really critical point because it seems to form the rationale being used to explain the reversal of the earlier assessment of significant concerns about high-rise guidelines and about how this project did not meet them. So if this is correct, this assessment that it would pose negative planning consequences, and if the planning consequences of 6 stories backing onto stable residential are so significant, how does this committee explain its support for mid-rise built form backing onto residential on main streets in the city? For instance, on Roosevelt Avenue in Kitchissippi Ward. Why did this committee think a 6-story structure within 3 meters of residents' backyards in the Amica building on Bank Street was okay? This doesn't make any sense to me, and it calls into question for me the current traditional main street zoning. Finally, and I hesitate here, I am really troubled by the dynamics that have unfolded on this application. I've been working on files, like planning files, for about 8 years now, and have never been aware of such an intense lobby effort by a developer. I question the early and more significant focus on lobbying at the political level rather than advocating for the merits of a proposal to planning review staff. Why engage if you feel that the merit and strength of your planning rationale is so clear? Certainly, having been made aware of this, I felt compelled to do the same. It was the first I'd spoken with most of you, and I wanted to provide you with the community's perspective.
Carolyn, we're at our time, and we do have a lot of speakers today, so I'll have to ask you to end there. But Councillor Menard does have a question for you.
Okay, thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for being here, Carolyn. Carolyn, you are, by all accounts, an expert in planning. You're on, although not in your role today, you sit on the city's PAC. You've got a good handle of the current official plan and the draft new official plan. And you've been sitting in on the Glebe Height and Character Study. I just have some questions about that process and what you've experienced there. How long would you say that the community has been working with staff on the Height and Character Study in the Glebe for now?
Right. Well, the genesis of the Height and Character Study was actually the approval at Planning Committee of the Minto building at 5th Avenue Court, which I believe was the summer of June 2018, if I'm not mistaken. So, and that was sort of, the idea was that, that came on the heels of what I call the beer store site, a little farther south on Bank Street. Those were both very, very large files. They were very divisive, really annoying for the developer, I'm sure, really very divisive amongst the community, time consuming for all the reasons that I mentioned earlier. We said, okay, let's not do this, how many times up and down Bank Street. Let's have the open discussion outside an application review process. Let's have an open discussion. The chips will fall where they may, and then we can let developers get on with it. And hopefully we would get to, the assumption was that we would get to a good place. And I feel that we have gotten to a very good place with the Bank Street Height and Character Study, and the GCA has written formally to support the Bank Street study. It has taken some discussion amongst the community to get us there, I would say, and to get to a point where there is support for the greater height that is being proposed in the study. But I think I thought we were there, and yet we are still waiting for that to come through. So that's the genesis of it, and it was obviously something that was supported by Planning Committee too. Again, have the open discussion. Let's not do this every time.
Yeah. So it's been about 2.5, 3 years, and has that included developers, the BIA, community members, other members of the city and city staff working together collaboratively?
Yes, there was a steering committee that comprised the executive director of the Glebe BIA, as well as developers, Kevin Harper from Minto was on it, as well as, sorry, I'm forgetting the other developer, the names of the other developer. There were 2 developers represented there. But certainly I can also imagine that anyone who owns land in the glebe would have, or certainly should have, been well aware of. I know there are challenges, obviously, with always with reaching out on the consultation process, but I can't imagine that anyone who owns land within the area of the study would not have been able to become aware of the existence of the study and engage. So actually, I'm a bit surprised as well that the applicant in this case, my understanding anyway, is that there was little or no or very little engagement on the Bank Street study.
Well, I asked that question, Carolyn, because I did invite the current applicant and the developer to partake in that study a long time ago, to say, come in, let's do this together, let's work on this together, and they didn't take part in it. And it's been now years, and now we're actually just a month and a half, it seems, before the heightened character study, the secondary plan, is going to be approved as part of the new official plan. And so, and I guess the risks there for the new official plan, the new secondary plan, is what I'm driving at, is how much does this put that at risk in other areas? So look, I thank you for being here and appreciate your expertise on this and your presentation.
Yeah, thank you. And if I may just add, because I want to make sure that my comments are not misinterpreted, the final comments that I was making, I have a lot of respect for staff in the planning department, and this is not meant to be any reflection on the part. I appreciated very much, both on the policy side and application review side of the house, the effort that and the commitment certainly to trying to do the right thing by all stakeholders for that matter. But I really feel like in this place that they have been just put in an impossible situation. I feel for them, I really do. So I just want to make sure that my comments are not going to be misinterpreted on that front. I hesitated. I have been hesitating to even talk about what I have observed, but I do find it very troubling, I must say. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Carolyn, for your presentation. Also, I know you've had a chance to meet with a number of the committee members prior to today's meeting as well. So thank you for reaching out to you and your colleagues at the GCA. I know those conversations are helpful for us as we prepare for these meetings. So thank you.
Well, thank you for your time. I try not to do it. I really do. But I didn't feel like I had much choice in this situation.
We have 2 representatives from the applicants who are signed up to speak. We have Kirsten Nietzsche and Barry Hoban. Kristen, are you up first, or is Barry speaking first? What's your preference here?
Yes, I think Kirsten's first. Yes, I have a presentation that Melody can put up on the screen. Thank you. Great, so thank you very much, Acting Chair and members of committee. My name is Kirsten Nietzsche. I'm a registered professional planner with the Canadian Institute of Planners, and I'm a senior planner with FOTEN Planning and Design. I do have other members of FOTEN with me here today, Brian Casagrande and Timothy Bede, who will be able to participate and answer questions after the presentation. So as we've discussed today, we're here to discuss the zoning bylaw amendment application for 30 through to 48 Chamberlain Avenue. Next slide, please. I won't spend too much time on the context. We're all very familiar, but just an overview. This site is at the north end of the glebe, abutting Highway 417 to the north. It is largely developed with surface parking lot, as well as 2 buildings, a 2.5 story medical office building and a 2-story office building. Moving to the next slide. We can just see the context here, as we've heard from the Rosebury Avenue residents today. We have residential development to the south, and then to the north we have the highway. Chamberlain Avenue itself, it really is an edge condition and entrance into the glebe coming from the west, and has the potential for intensification and redevelopment to support the official plan and moving forward with growth in the urban area. So next slide, please. So as a project summary, the proposed development is a 16-story building. Of that 16 stories, 3 stories is a podium. It will have ground floor commercial of approximately 350 square meters. It will have 150 dwelling units, of which almost 10% will be 3-bedroom units, including 2 walkout units at ground. 8 of those units will also be 2 bedrooms plus dens. There'll be amenity space. There'll be bicycle parking at a 1-to-1 ratio. So that means each unit will have a dedicated bicycle parking space. And there will be a total of 70 70 parking spaces. This 70 spaces actually represents a reduction in the required residential requirement, just to acknowledge the walkability of the neighborhood and proximity to amenities and services along the traditional main street. The site is very large, over 2,000 square meters, which is not very typical in the urban area. It's not often that we get lots of this size with the ability to redevelop. So moving to the next slide. So just I guess a brief overline. We've heard a lot about engagement today, and I just want to reiterate that we've actually been engaged in this process for 3 years now. FOTAN has been working with the property owner since 2018. The property owner has owned this property for some time. You know, they own their business on the property and been running it for a number of years. We have participated in the Glebe Heightened Character Study. We met with staff. So the Heightened Character Study first public open house was in February 2019. And we met with staff right after that in March. We've had ongoing meetings with the ward councillor in 2019 through to 2021, at least 2. We've also met with the GCA, with Carolyn and her team. We've met with city staff numerous times, including Peter Giles, the main contact for the Height study. We've attended an informal urban design review panel, even though this site is not in a design priority area. So just as a summary, we have been very involved and continue to be involved in conversations about development on the site. So moving to the next slide. So just a very brief overview. The site is in the general urban area. So the general urban area does permit a range of housing choices and uses. And if we move to the next slide, we can see that we're on an arterial road, and the general urban area does permit the consideration of greater heights on arterial roads, which are also transit priority corridors. Moving to the next slide, it just shows that this site is also on a transit priority corridor. I just want to note that the official plan does not distinguish between isolated measures or not. Next slide. Sorry, I'm going to actually skip one more slide. So briefly, from a zoning perspective, this is zoned general mixed use. We are seeking to keep that existing zoning. It's important to note that we did not ask for apartment high rise because this is a mixed use building. Dwelling units are already permitted in the current zoning, and the GM zone also permits high rise in section 187, subsection 6, subsection C. Moving to the next slide. So looking at the high rise planning provisions, which were put in place, they are under appeal, but they support the urban design guidelines. The only provision we're not meeting is the rear yard tower setback. We're asking for a reduction of 10 meters down to 8 meters. And so just an important consideration is the urban design guidelines are not policy. So we're not asking for a reduction from 20 meters, we're asking a reduction from 10. So moving to the next slide, if we have some time, just looking at this design, we do have a podium and tower format. Next slide.
5 minutes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kirsten. I think we'll go to Mr. Hoban next, and then we'll go to questions for the applicant from councilors. So Barry?
All right, if we could just start, I'll be as quick as I possibly can. Thank you for the presentations of residents. I think they highlight all the issues that we considered, and we basically are, please advance. We're looking at this from a distant vision perspective. There are impacts, no matter if it's a 6 to 9 story building or if it's a 16-story building. The reality is that Chamberlain's context shapes everything. Chamberlain's a very busy street. This is a transit corridor. If you flip to the next one. It also is a little bit about the history of Chamberlain. Chamberlain at one point in time, 1958, before the Queensway, was a double-sided street. And over time, 1965 to 1991 gets basically decimated by cars and buildings are removed. And we're at a current situation where we have a mix of parking lots and open space, but we are on a transit corridor. Please head. Looking at the site itself, we talked a lot today about the impacts with respect to Rosebury. I think that's fair to say. There are impacts, as I said, whether it's a 6 to 9 story building or it's a 16-story building. Rosebury is a mix of mid-rise or low-rise buildings, a mix of singles and multiple dwellings. Move ahead. Just a quick look at what's immediately behind our property. It's not that those are pristine backyards. In fact, many of them are used for parking lots for cars. Move ahead. So key ideas: site access, strong edge to the building, built form, neighborhood considerations, and our adjustments to planning. Flip ahead. As I said, you know, even if I looked at this as a mid-rise building, everybody's been talking about this fitting into a mid-rise format. It's my position from a design perspective that a mid-rise does not serve us well. In a 6 to 9 story building, we could have a density somewhere between 97 and 135,000 square feet of density. But basically, there would be a substantial sky plane impact. There would be a greater shadow impact, contrary to what everyone has said. And basically, we would create a strong overlook situation, because in a low-rise building, your tendency is to look down, not to look at a distance. Please add. So what we looked at was reallocating the mass of a mid-rise building, and basically keeping a low podium for protection. And so in the relocation mass, the middle slide, you will see that our footprint of the building is actually quite small. It's about 660 meters squared compared to the high-rise guidelines of 750. But in the process of keeping that low-rise podium, we actually protect the neighbors to the south. And there's a 10 decibel difference between night and day and throughout the day, whether it's day or night. And the last thing is the articulation of the building, where we minimize the face that's to the south in terms of impact. So when it comes to impact, I'm making the case that building form can affect impact. I wish we would stop talking about height as being the only issue. It's not serving us well as a planning committee. It's not serving us well in the official plan. We really need to consider how form, how mass actually has an impact. Flip ahead. In terms of site access, because Chamberlain's a busy street, we have to contain all our site parking, our visitor parking, turnaround capacity, and access to the basement on our site. So flip ahead. This is the 3D, which shows that, which we open up the ground plane. So it's clearly, as you move along Chamberlain, that you have easy access and can see where you come and go. The other thing about Chamberlain, we're 240 feet long as a site. The low podium, which is human scale and is scaled to the neighbors to the south, is intended, in fact, to repopulate Chamberlain in a way that's friendly to the public realm. Flip ahead. This is the look of the edge condition. Flip ahead. The cross section shows how that cross section relative to the Queensway protects the neighbors to the south. Flip ahead. And the notion of built form of an articulated base, the bottom right building is a fine example of a project we just finished at Laurier and Friel, where the ground floor is quite animated and creates a human scale. Flip ahead. There's consideration for setback. There's some discussion, I think it's Todd mentioned the notion of landscaping. We have set the building below ground to protect the trees on the adjacent property, as well as to allow planting on our property. Flip ahead. Flip it, keep flipping ahead because we're moving very quickly here. The other thing is the sky plane with respect to impacts. Basically, we've shown sky plane diagrams that show both in the spring when there's no leaves on the tree and in full summer. There will be an impact, but the minimum impact is minimized because the small footprint. Flip ahead.
Thank you, Barry. We're at our 5 minutes, so I'm going to have to stop you there. But
sure.
There's opportunity now for councilors, committee members to ask any questions they have for the applicant team. Councilor Leeper, I see your hand up. Go ahead.
Thanks. I don't have a ton of questions for the applicant, but Barry, I do wonder, I'll be honest, my back is up a little bit. You differentiated between the multi-res and the single ownership of some of the buildings on Rosebury. Surely your intent is not to suggest that we can treat multi-res differently in a low-rise neighborhood than single ownership?
No, I was just really speaking to what happens in those backyards. And with respect to impact, I didn't get into the full explanation of tree canopy being maintained and all of those things. And also what I was really trying to reference was the scale of the buildings that are on Rosebury suits the scale of the podium. And that instead of a 6 to a 9-story mass, which would be continuous and would not respect that scale, that our podium actually matches the scale of those buildings.
I think the tenure is irrelevant to that discussion. I'll
Oh,
leave it there.
I wasn't speaking about tenure from that perspective. I was speaking about basically on the ground.
Okay, I think as we try to encourage more rental in our low-rise core neighborhoods, it's critical that we ensure that they enjoy all the protections that single ownership households would.
And I definitely wasn't making the case that because it's a certain situation that our building is more appropriate. I was talking about form and I was talking about a rear yard.
Okay. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Councillor. Councillor Kitts, please.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question. I think this would be for Barry. I know you were trying to go quickly and make the most of your 5 minutes, but could you expand a bit on your assertion that the proposed form would be less intrusive to neighboring residents than a mid-rise form, perhaps with respect to shadowing and all that?
Sure. If you could perhaps put up back on the screen, even the second or third slide, please. Flip ahead. Keep going. Yeah, okay. Step back. Let's use this for example. So this isn't a Zoom call, so I couldn't mark it up, but a 6 to a 9-story building would basically create a constant wall, which would be 220 feet long. So just to put it in context, it's a bar building that would expand between, say, 1st and 2nd Avenue. The whole thing would be at a constant height. So for the people who are on the south side, their sky plane has totally been eradicated. Right? It's gone. 6 to 9 stories is a constant wall. Basically, the angular plane would you have to look. You would not be able to see very much of the sky plane. What we've done is, because we've used a small footprint for the building, it's 650 meters squared. It leaves a lot of the sky plane open. And on top of that, the scale of the podium, which is what I was trying to make to Councillor Leeper, the scale of the podium being 3 stories, basically matches the height of those buildings that are behind it. So this comes back to my position that it's, I heard, I think Todd spoke about privacy, shadow, and overlook as 3 ideas. And it's been mentioned by a couple of other individuals as well. First of all, in a 6 to 9 story building, I don't know where the magic point is, whether it's 4 to 6 stories, somewhere in there. Basically, people are looking down. When you get above a certain height, people are looking from a prospect perspective at distance. So if you look at this image and you realize what's behind us is Central Park, the smaller the footprint and the higher the building, it means that a lot of those units basically have a long view to the glebe to the south or a long view to downtown, and avoid the detrimental aspects of the Queensway. So the other thing that I mentioned was about low-rise form being continuous. Basically, it has a 10 decibel reduction in noise. Now, if you put a 9-story, would you say you have even a greater reduction in noise? Yes, of course you would. But I believe that there are other detrimental aspects to it. And if we flip ahead a little bit further, keep going to the sky plane. Okay, this one here. But sorry, go back. So those are 3 different views. One is from Lion Street, which is the street that's at the west end, perpendicular to Chamberlain. Renfrew is directly south of this site. On the other side of the park, Central Park is in between us. And the third shot is taken from Bank Street. In each case, you can see the form of the building. Now, it's not my contention that the high-rise building doesn't have impact. It has impact, just like a mid-rise building, 6 to 9 stories. But it's my point that in this picture, the sky plane is protected. There's a greater amount of the sky. We talked a little bit about shadows, but realistically, it's an academic exercise because the shadow, with the period that when we've done the shadow analysis, it happens at the solstice, week in and week out, that there is a minor piece that actually casts a shadow. My contention, a 6 to 9 story building would also cast that same long shadow, but would obliterate most of those backyards in terms of sun shadowing during that strategic time. Obviously, when you get to March, sun is rising in the east and setting due west. It's basically equal, and the sun shadowing has no impact whatsoever. None. There's some discussion about a shadow impact going out to Bank Street. It's kind of laughable because Bank Street's going to have a 6-story height envelope. That's part of the height and character study. So in that case, those buildings on Bank Street will cast a shadow across Bank Street.
Okay.
So
Thank you, Chair.
I look at overlook, I look at sun shadowing, I look at sky plane, and saying those are all relevant things. And so when a neighbor says I'm worried about impact, I understand that completely. But it's my position as a designer, a 3-dimensional designer, that there are less impacts with an alternate form, and that would be my case.
Okay, I appreciate the further explanation. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Thank you, Barry, for the presentation. I'm wondering what your understanding is for the potential for another tower to the east of this location.
Well, east to us is the credit union building, correct? It's a substantial building, and quasi-institutional because it's not quite retail. It's kind of a service building. There's enough space. We set back our building 10 meters, but if you set back on their property another 10 meters, there wouldn't be a potential for a building. However, if they decided to tear all that down and start over again, there would be potential for another building there.
Okay.
But in terms of the high-rise guidelines, 20 to 23 meter separation would be required.
Okay, thank you for that. Is there any affordable housing being planned for this development? Is 150?
Well, certainly is family oriented in terms of with the number of 3 bedrooms and 2 bedroom plus den, and plus the ground oriented units, which are at the back. No, we skipped over that very quickly, but those backyards would all be residential at grade, facing residential at grade on Rosebury. In terms of the actual financing that relates to affordability, is whether we're going to use the CMHC housing fund to be able to do that. I can't speak to that yet. That's a developer decision. But I understand the interest, and quite frankly, I'm interested in those issues in terms of how we actually include affordable units within any project.
Okay, thank you for that. You mentioned in your presentation a reallocation of mass, and staff also in a resubmission have talked about some reallocation of mass, and that's more important than height, and how that kind of mass has an impact. So is this a 1-for-1 reallocation of mass?
Well, when I looked at it from a mid-rise perspective, the mass potential is somewhere between 100 and 135,000 square feet. Our proposal is like 131, if I'm not mistaken, according. So basically, yes, if you went to a full 9 stories and they reallocated, we would be item for item. If you said, no, it's only going to be 6 stories, we would be 100,000 versus 130,000. So it would be slightly more intensive.
I appreciate that, but I suppose you'd have to take the current condition. What is the zoning for the current condition?
I like Kristen speak to that, but I believe that it's currently got a 4-story limit on it.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. My understanding is the GFI and the increase would be about 33% or more, and I think community is willing to negotiate on how that might work, but they haven't been given that opportunity. So I appreciate this. There's one last question around the UDRP. You folks, you went there informally, just have your initial informal consultation, as is a regular process, and you're going to go back there, I understand, for site plan after this application. What was the result of that initial consultation with UDRP?
I'll let Kirsten speak to that. I mean, in terms of process.
So as an informal process, it is confidential. And so we took comments from that, from the UDRP and shaped the project moving forward. Of course, if we do go to a site formal, so realizing this site is not in a design priority area, so any choice to go to UDRP is voluntary. If the application does go to formal, that process will be public and members of the community can watch and listen to the comments at that time.
Okay, I was hoping for a bit more detail, but if that's all you're willing to provide, that's fine. Thank you.
Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. And just to follow up on Councillor Menard's question, I actually don't consider it appropriate that you won't share with us what the UDRP told us. Did they speak to anything that would affect the zoning? Because once we get to site plan, the zoning's done. Right,
Yes,
you've got an 18-story building. Did the UDRP address height considerations, floor plate size, podium heights, etc.?
Acting Chair, so I mean, to be quite frank, our attendance at the UDRP we felt was did not actually provide a very comprehensive review of the urban design merits of the application and instead focused on the glebe height and character study recommendations. So, you know, that's why we're reluctant to talk about it, because in the sense, as we've discussed today, the glebe height and character study is not an applicable policy. It still hasn't been before planning committee or council. So really that was our feeling. We don't feel that they actually did take a look at the urban design merits from the same way that Barry has taken a look at them in his design evolution of the building.
Right, so they compared the proposal to what we assume will be the outcome of the height and character study.
Yes, that's correct.
And I mean, isn't that appropriate to take a look at where the community is going with this, where the planning department is going with this, and to weigh it against that? I realize it's not in effect today, but these secondary plans have been cited by our official planning staff as continuing to guide development when we pass an official plan that contemplates, you know, some really significant increases in intensification. And residents want to know that we are serious about adhering to those plans. And if the UDRP has chosen to weigh this proposal against the directions of the secondary plan of the height and character study, I think Ottawa residents should know what they said about that.
So acting chair, sorry.
I'd love.
Barry obviously has lots to say. I mean, professionally, my professional opinion is that no, they should not be reviewing a proposed development against a policy that does not exist. Much like planning staff and ourselves as professional planners have to review a proposed development against current policy, it is not appropriate for a review body that is not an approval authority, they are a review body. It is not appropriate for them to review a policy that does not exist. So that's my opinion. So while I understand that is the direction from the community, you know, we are participating and we are, you know, others are allowed to participate in that separate process that's ongoing, and they have their opportunities to provide comments through that process, much like we have. So, you know, for this application, we have to consider the policies that are in place today, and that is the official plan itself and no secondary plan.
So council, you basically got the official party line from a legalistic perspective, but let me just say that we have participated, and I have, because I own property within the glebe height and character study on Bank Street from the very early days of this. And I have never understood 6-story height envelope on Chamberlain west of Bank Street and a 16-story height envelope east of Bank on Isabella. Never understood that. And we didn't get to a final slide, but if you could just clue up, if I could just get a slide queued up, probably 3/4 the way presentation, I'll basically take you through that. Go back one, please. Yeah. So I didn't set this angular plane strategy, but if you look at the angular plane, which is the gauze on this diagram, it looks at an angular plane on Rosebury using a starting height from the R3 zoning of 10.5 meters, and you end up with a 16-story building. If I took the same angular plane strategy that is used in the height and character study over to Isabella and Pretoria, they start at 14.5 meters, and as a result, the angular plane is even higher than this. So all I'm just going to say is that I participated in this glebe height and character study very early on. I have never understood, nor do I believe, that there has been proper consideration of height along Chamberlain versus height along Isabella. That's my simple comment.
I don't want to get into a debate because we're not allowed to, but yeah, I think that's
I'm just making an observation. It is frustrating, and I'll tell you, it's interesting that out of the box, when the height and character study started, from the very first meeting, it's been 6 stories, and we have constantly said there's an alternate form thing. We have seen no adjustment to that and no rationale. Why 6 on one side and 16 on the other? So I'm just. So we talk a lot about process, but I just don't see any adjustment to process, like.
Or staff and the community did not agree. You know, we get to these impasses where choices have to be made.
Correct. Okay.
It's a frustrating position to be in as a politician who is largely in favor of the direction of the new official plan, and the trust in our processes is not present to the degree that we need it to be in order to have a smooth approval of the OP. So, but we'll have a coffee, Barry, and I know we disagree on this.
I don't think we disagree. I think we actually agree on process, and I agree on the notion of the way things get polarized. I do. I'm just a simple architect, so I look at things from a 3-dimensional perspective. Okay, and there is room for form. There is room for form in this discussion.
We have a lot of difference of agreements on this. I think this has been helpful, but I think we need to move on. Councilor Menard has another question.
Thanks very much, Chair. I just want to say I need to defend our staff here on what they've done with the height and character study. You know, Mr. Hopeman mentioned they has not heard a defense of it. Well, I have to disagree. That defense has been there in writing. The different conditions that exist between the two areas has been very clear with that angular plane. It has been there in public consultations on the glebe height and character study, and it has been there on public consultations on 30 to 48 Chamberlain. So there has been extensive discussion about the difference. And of course, that community, the BIA, which extends to these areas as well, and the developers in this study have all agreed that there is a need for some height north of Isabella Pretoria that has a largely different condition, which I'll go through in my presentation later on. But I need to defend our staff on what they have said and what they've done there already. With regard to the Urban Design Review Panel, just one quick question, Chair, is the applicant has mentioned that they're not subject to an urban design review process because they're not in a design priority area. But the staff report says they are in a design priority area. So if we can just get clarification on that.
Is that for the applicant, Councilor Menard?
It's for whoever wants to clarify. The staff report says they are in a design priority area and they are subject to UDRP, and the applicant is saying it is not a design priority area and that they are not subject to UDRP.
Okay, so we're about to go to staff for questions. I think that's appropriate for staff. Do you have any more questions for the applicant before we do that?
Thank you, Chair.
Okay, So I'm seeing no more questions from councillors for the applicant. So we are going to move on to questions for staff. I think there's enough difference of opinion that we've heard from delegations and from the applicant. I would like to ask Steve Gauthier. He's the author of the report that we're considering today and the recommendations. So I would like to give Steve just a moment to address some of the questions that are still out there over the course of the last hour or so. So Steve, the floor is yours. And I know you have some slides that may be useful as well. So Melody, if you could bring those up.
Okay, so there is no need to repeat a lot of the policies and sections of the official plan that have already been presented. So I would like you to go directly to the images. Thank you very much. The first image, please. Okay, so the image you see there is a high rise against low rise. Okay, so it shows what essentially the guidelines are recommending. So distance, angular plane, etc. Go to the next image. So those same high-rise guidelines, okay, they prescribe distance between towers, okay, to try to mitigate the overlook issues, all right? What's important to mention here is that if the high-rise design guidelines are not being met or respected, as was explained by the delegation, that means that the next option is a mid-rise. So please go to the next image. Okay, so the next one again, I'll come back to this one. Okay, so it is very important here, okay, on that site-specific application to mention that it's a consolidation that is equivalent to 7 residential lots. And as mentioned before, it's a very shallow lot. So if the next option is a mid-rise, okay, the image there shows the impact in terms of overlook. So we're back to an impact that is similar to the previous image that I've shown, but in an horizontal scenario. Okay, so there are no guidelines for mid-rise buildings. So the staff did acknowledge the high-rise guidelines. We spoke about the distance, we spoke about the angular plane, etc. Okay, so then staff went on site and considered the impact of a mid-rise, okay, but also had to take into consideration that there's no mid-rise guidelines, so no distance, okay, no tools prescribed. So that's when staff compared the two masses, so the horizontal versus the vertical. And I heard that staff had presented a position at the information session. Yes, but information session was in the middle of the process. But subsequent to this analysis, staff has met on 3 different occasions with the councillor's office, with the resident, and with the community association on April 29, on May 13, and on June 7, to explain the findings of the site visit, to explain the comparison between the two masses. So the proposed development has the facade of the tower is 32 meters, the width of the podium is 70 meters. So this design releases for about half or even more the mass above the 3rd story. So for floor 4, 5, and 6, for most of the width of the development. So, and a slim tower, this tower is 670 square meters, if I'm correct. So the shadowing impact of a slim tower moves quickly, whereas a 6-story mid-rise building would throw a shadow that reaches the house, so that deprive the backyard from sun, but also the interior of the house, the ground floor, the upper floor. I think those images reveals a lot. You can go back also to the image just before this one as one last comment. Just before this one. Okay, so I was talking about the overlook, but the distance between high rise and low rise, if you look at this image, is mainly happening at the base. So there's never going to be a high rise on that zoning at the back. It's R3. And as Mr. Oben was explaining, the higher you go, the more you look away past the houses. So the staff's opinion is that due to the very wide lot consolidation that is equivalent to 7 residential lots, and due to the absence of guidelines, after doing a mass comparison, the proposed development with a slim tower is more appropriate.
Okay, thank you, Steve, for the overview. Would like to go to any councillors who have questions for staff. Councillor Menard.
Thanks, Chair. I'll ask some questions. Thank you, Steve, for that presentation. I need to go through a couple of pieces where we say, because we're debating the shadow impact and we're debating the privacy and overlook impact. And I need to go back to other comments that have been made previously about these, because of course there's been a full change in staff position. And so the original staff position on shadow impacts was that although less properties would be affected immediately south by the proposed tower, more properties would be affected to the southeast, and this is as far as Bank Street. Furthermore, although less properties appear to be affected immediately south, those affected will be completely deprived of sunlight starting at 4:30. And then staff say the 6-story height, although affecting more properties, would not cast a shadow all the way to Rosebury houses. With proper setbacks and stepbacks applied to the upper stories, a deeper part of the backyards along the houses could be cleared from shadow. Is that still accurate?
Well, I heard earlier, and you just mentioned it about the shadowing and the step back, but this building is located in the north, and sun, sorry for lack of vocabulary, from dusk till at dawn goes to sleep on to the northwest. So what the step back would do would release a corner of the building on the west of the building. So the shadowing would change slightly for the first properties at the back. But the building is to the north. It's not as if the building would be to the south. It's to the north. So the sun starts to the east and then lies to the northwest. So if the properties immediately south are deprived from, as I said, the rear yard plus sun entering the house versus a quick shadow that casts further away on Rosebury, I guess there can be a difference of opinion, but the impact on the houses behind being completely deprived for a longer period for the backyard and inside the house to staff is a more significant impact.
Okay, and if there is a replica tower there as well, is there any shadowing impacts with that?
There would be a shadow impact, and the staff would work closely with the developer, same as this one. The urban design guidelines, the high-rise guidelines recommend not to exceed 750 square meters as a floor plate. Well, this tower is way under that. It's 670 square meters. And if you look at the design, the rear facade gets tighter. It's narrower than the front to provide an angle. So staff would work with the developer to make sure that we have a slim tower and that we have a longer but a quicker window of shadowing.
And that would be to adhere to the urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings. And that's an important point. In the central area, those guidelines, when you don't have a secondary plan, they play a very large role. And they state that you need to establish a minimum 20-meter tower setback from the abutting low-rise residential properties. And just a yes or no is fine. I know we're short on time. Does this application meet that guideline?
Well, 20 meters is in the central area. The angular plane is elsewhere. So here we're talking about a 45-degree angular plane. So we've explained our rationale. People keep pointing at the tower exceeding the 45-degree angular plane, but it needs to be mentioned that under that 45-degree angular plane, there's a lot of mass release for more than half of the width of this development. So it's 4 5, and 6 are completely cleared from underneath. So there's a give and take. So that mass is being relocated up. It's a building that is north, and all those units are now away from the rear yard and from the rear window looking past the houses.
So it does meet the 20 meters tower setback, and it does meet the angular plane.
Well, the 20 meter setback is applicable to the central area.
Yes.
So we're talking about the 45-degree angular plane, and we've seen the study, the height and character study starts the angular plane inside the lot. But as Mr. Oben presented in his presentation, the 45-degree angular plane can start at different location. The images showed that it started from the front wall at the back of the house is the same as the study recommends east of Bank Street. So there's a lot of discussion on where that 45-degree angular plane should start. With the image shown by Mr. Oben, we're completely underneath. If we move it towards the property, that's the give and take that I've explained. There's more mass above, but away from the houses, and that mass is north. So we're releasing from floor 4 to 6 for more than half of development. This is all released underneath the 45-degree angular plane.
Okay, so the 45-degree angular plane, if you took say a different height, which is the condition to the east, not the condition here, then it could potentially meet that if you also put it to the very front of the property instead of to the very back of the property, which is not normally how the 45-degree angular plane, I guess, is applied in the urban design guidelines for high-rise buildings. But I just wanted to also mention your comment about privacy and overlook. Previously, you had mentioned that privacy and overlook, staff is of the opinion that a 6-story built form with recessed upper floors would, in the overall, be less impactful to Rosebury properties. Although staff appreciates the proposed 3-story base and the smaller tower floor plate, the privacy and overlook impact on the low-rise residential building immediately behind the 16-story tower is too significant.
Yeah, those are the comments based on the interpretation of the guidelines, and staff has always acknowledged those guidelines. In the comments that follow the circulation that you just read at the information session, okay, then the staff went on site to conduct the staff analysis. And if I could ask for the presentation to be put back in, I have an image that I would like to show, just one slide, and it shows 100 Isabella. It's just before this one. Okay, so there was a desk analysis. The proposal was compared against the guidelines, and that's what reflected in the circulation comment, and that's what was mentioned at the information session. But at the information session, and I've watched the video again, I did say that the process is not finished, and I did say that further analysis needed to be done. And I did say, because when I sent those comments to the applicant replied back with arguments. So I've pushed further the analysis. I went on site and I've looked at comparable. So if you look at 100 Isabella Street, so I'm standing in the backyard looking at a 7-story building. And this image shows the redistribution above the 3rd story, because the podium proposed for 3048 Chamberlain is a 3-story podium. So it takes all those windows and all that mass and it relocates it in a vertical way. And as mentioned earlier, the tower was, from the initial proposal, the tower was pushed 10 meters inside toward the west. So there's a 10-meter setback to the east. And this is in case a similar development would be proposed to the east, we wouldn't want to end up with a wall. So we would want to have breathing space between 2 slim towers. But the tower was put behind those properties where you have a large, generous canopy. I went on site to do those site visits. I've noticed that. And I've also met with the resident on June 7th on site, and I was standing underneath that canopy, a very large canopy. So the mass is being redistributed. It is acknowledged that those properties aligned with the tower will be aligned with the tower. But in between those properties and the tower, there's a generous tree buffer that covers the backyard, completely covers the backyard. And as I said earlier, this building is located to the north.
Yes, and we're acknowledging now that there's a potential for a second tower right beside this one, which would also be impactful. And I guess you keep mentioning the redistribution, but can you please clarify, this is not a straight redistribution, like the 30-story tower into the 65-story tower that Councillor Moffat references often, the box into the upwards height. This is not that. This is quite a bit of increase in GFI on top of that.
Okay, well then, if we're talking about increase in GFA, if
so, Mr. Gauthier, I just wanted to, can you just confirm that that is the case? I know you're the defense of the report, and that's fine, but I'm just asking you, is that
there's more GFA with the proposed development, but the same as this proposal has more GFA, the applicant could have requested for more GFA. That's a rezoning. They could have asked for a 9-story building to reach that GFA, and that 9-story building wouldn't have been put against any guidelines because there's no guidelines for mid-rise. So
right.
if you want, that argument has been presented before about the GFA. There's more GFA with the tower than a 6-story, but the applicant has never proposed for a 6th tower. For a 6-story.
Mr. Gauthier, I suppose that the issue with the 6-story is that that's what the heightened character study for 2.5 years has been recommending, and that is what you did indeed compare it to in the staff report that is in front of us today, which is why the 6-story comparison is being made, which leads to the question of if the heightened character study were already approved earlier, prior to this application coming in, would city staff still be making the recommendation that they're making today on this property?
Yes, they would. After the site analysis, the complete analysis that was described in details.
So just to clarify what that means, after a 3-year process to put in place a secondary plan just newly minted, an application could come in the next day and staff would throw out the recommendations in that heightened character study because the application came in despite all that work. I just want to clarify that.
No, this is not what I said. If the application would come in and suggest, and it would be a consolidation equivalent to 7 lot, staff would have to, again, compare the 2 different mass, the 2 different build form in terms of impact. So the analysis would be the same. Study adopted or not adopted, the analysis would be the same.
Yes, I see you're saying the analysis would be the same, but the consolidation of lots is considered already in the heightened character study. It is considered as part of that. It would not have been changed. And so this is what's so concerning to communities and others who engage in these processes, is that there's a study that is done, there's a 3-year amount of work, and then an application comes in and it can be thrown out very easily. And so that to me, I didn't understand that if the heightened character study was already approved, you would still be recommending these same recommendation in front of us, which has switched substantially.
Just to make sure, was the question if this specific proposal would be presented after? I think that's the question I heard, because if it's the same proposal, it's a consolidation of 7 lots. So it's the same approach by staff. This is a site, there was a study process, but this is a site-specific process. As much as the study process needs to be respected, this process also needs to be respected. The decision should not be made ahead of this process. This process needs to unfold completely.
So, Councillor Menard, you're at the end of your 5 minutes, so thank you. Thank you, Steve. I think we're veering a little bit into the hypothetical and outside of process here. I'd just like to give an opportunity for Mr. Mark. We do not yet have a Bank Street heightened character study approved. Is that correct, Mr. Mark?
That is correct, Mr. Chair, Ms. Acting Chair.
So can we evaluate today's proposal against a non-existent policy?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay. I know Doug James was trying to get my attention earlier and wanted to add something to the commentary. Doug James?
Yes, thank you, Acting Chair. Just with respect to a number of things that have come up, I'll see if I can answer them. For the UDRP, just to confirm, this is not in a design priority area. The design priority area runs down Bank Street, not down this portion of Chamberlain. So it is not. They went voluntarily to the UDRP, and to go back with in the future would be, they would do so again voluntarily. And just wanted to reiterate it. Maybe it needs to be said though, I suppose, but the study may have been going on for years, but when someone submits an application, it's a complete application through the Planning Act. We have to deal with it under the policies that exist today. And if you read the staff report, our recommendation is for approval of this based on the policies that exist today. It's not a comparison of what 6 stories or 9 stories or compared to the 16. It's actually only, I would submit as before committee and would before council, is that how this development fits in with the policies, the 16-story. That's all that the committee and council have to consider, not a comparison between the two. And it's our opinion, of course, that, and again, it was as mentioned by Kirsten and Mr. Hoban, that this is a better development in terms of meeting those policies. People have talked about the guidelines. The guidelines are just guidelines. They're not the policy. The policy actually has the teeth. The guidelines do not become policy. We look to them for the guidance. There's the lot area. This is over the lot area. The floor plate of the building. This is actually, the floor plate of the building, as mentioned, was about 100 square meters under that. 45-degree angular plane. As you can see, it's kind of a moving target. It's just something that we can consider, because I say it's a moving target because it depends on where you take it, at the back of the rear yards, if you take it out at the street. It's just something for us to consider. As far as that, in terms of the guideline for, there's a lot of discussion on this about the 20 meters between the tower and the buildings. Actually, we have 8 meters on this property, and the properties on Rosebury have a very significant rear yard setback. Some cases, I was just looking on GeoWattawa doing the measuring tool, 12 meters. So you get around the 20-meter separation between buildings that way as well. Just for considering that, just wanted to straighten some things out so that when committee makes its decision, they will hopefully consider it against the policies that exist today, and not, even though there's been a study going on, it's the policies that exist today that take precedent.
Okay, thank you, Doug. Going to our next committee members with questions. Councillor Kitts.
Thank you, Chair. I think some of my questions were asked already, but realize that a pinch point for the community is that the application, as we've been discussing, is coming before the study is complete. I'll be honest, I was a bit surprised to learn that this part of Chamberlain was included in the study, because it has a much different feel and environment than Bank Street. But it was obviously clear on the map that one of the delegations shared that this address is included. So I was just wondering if staff could explain why the section of Chamberlain was included in that study.
Is it okay?
Thanks for the question, Councillor. Before I turn it over to Peter Giles, I will just confirm that we are proposing to remove these lands from the character study area. I'll ask Peter to address the original at the start of this.
Is Peter on mute?
Just looking at our list here. He is here, and
he's
there.
Looks
like he's on. Microphone is off for Peter Giles.
Okay, sorry about that. Here we go. Yes, I'll just turn my video on as well. Okay, yes, good question. So the that portion of Chamberlain was included as part of the study area. In fact, not just Chamberlain, but also on Isabella. So both sides of Bank Street were included because, in fact, there's really a limited potential for intensification as part of the glebe study. We thought that, in general, the north part of the glebe really does hold a lot of potential for intensification. These are, it's an edge condition. These are, there's many vacant properties, both on Chamberlain and on Isabella. We also recognize that, these properties would benefit from intensification because they're well supported by amenities. They're within walking distance, of course, from Bank Street, and the ability to support local businesses. And importantly, it's also very close to transit, both transit on Chamberlain and on Bank Street itself.
Okay, thank you. So, sorry, am I understanding that it was initially recommended, but it will not be perhaps in the final version of the study?
Yeah, that's right. So through you, Mr. Chair, Councillor, that's right. There is a recommendation for 6 stories for Chamberlain from 14 Chamberlain all the way out to 52 Chamberlain. That's Mr. Charlebois' property. He spoke earlier. But the following this meeting, the idea is that 30 to 48 Chamberlain, that's before us, as well as 52 Chamberlain, would be removed from the Bank Street height and character study because it will have already been dealt with. At least 30 to 48. 52 Chamberlain would then become sort of an outlier. It would be discontinuous with the rest of the study area, and it's only a 7.5 meter wide property anyway. And Mr. Charlebois has asked us to remove it from the study area. So 14 Chamberlain, the credit union, the Desjardins property, would still be in the study area and still get the 6-story recommendation. But then we would remove the 30 to 52 Chamberlain for the purposes of the height and character study.
Okay, but if this application wasn't before us, it would have been included?
Correct.
Okay. Okay. I guess I'll just have a comment. I'm a bit torn on this one. This application for higher density on an arterial road and a transit priority corridor, given our intensification targets. I mean, it's so close to transit and walkable amenities. It feels a bit like, if not here, then where? But I am sympathetic to the fact that the community has been doing a lot of work with staff on a study that perhaps flies in the face of what's being proposed. So I'll continue to ponder, and I will just leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tierney.
Great. Thank you, Glenn. Most of my questions were answered already. The UDRP one still I'm scratching my head a little bit on, but that's okay. I am very concerned about the transition. This seems a little steep in my mind. Remind me again, how close to the transit node is this?
How close to the transit node? It's along a transit priority corridor.
Right, but I'm talking actually a transit node, like a station.
Well, I'd have to verify that. I don't have that answer for you
right
now.
Okay, I'll listen to the rest of the debate. Thank you.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Leeper.
Thanks, Chair. For Peter, we heard Barry suggest that this is a location that is, it can stand a little bit more height. It's on an arterial street. It's a single loaded street. What I am curious, because I that'll play into my decision here. What is the difference between the accommodation of greater height that was contemplated in, I guess, initial versions of the height and character study for the Isabella portion of Chamberlain Isabella versus Chamberlain?
Mr. Chair, Councillor, yes, that's a good question, and it's come up before, and it seems as though Mr. Hoban and I have a professional disagreement about this. I have tremendous respect for Mr. Hoban, but I do need to clarify that, as part of the analysis for the height and character study, we looked at the blocks on each side of Bank Street. And in the end, what we found is that there is a difference between the Chamberlain and Rosebury block versus the Isabella Pretoria block. It starts with the zoning. First, of course, the north side is very similar. Okay, we acknowledge that. But the difference is the south side. Okay, on the south side of the Isabella block, we have R4 properties on the north side of Pretoria that already contemplate intensification, right? It's an R4 zoning up to 14.5 meters, so that's a generous 4-story building. We have about just over half the block kind of in place because 460 O'Connor at the east block end is a big through block with a surface parking lot facing Pretoria. On the west side, on Rosebury, it is a different condition. It's a different zoning. It's R3, max height 11 meters, so those homes are already basically built out in terms of the maximum heights. There's other considerations. I don't need to get into all of them, but essentially, the street characteristics are different. On Rosebury, it's a quiet dead-end street. On Pretoria, it's a more important street. It's a busier street because it connects Bank Street all the way to Queen Elizabeth Drive. Okay. Now, so what I've said is that the Rosebury side is a more sensitive condition than the Pretoria side. So the challenge then became, where do we place the start of that 45-degree angular plane? On Pretoria, it was obvious that, following the guidelines, that we would place it at the front of those properties on the north side of Pretoria. So you go up to max height and zoning, 14.5 meters, and then 45 degrees going north from there. That results in the 16-story max building height on Isabella. Can we apply the same thing on Rosebury, given that it is a more sensitive condition? That's the big question. Okay, and for the purposes of the secondary plan, I didn't want to do that. I want to take a more cautious approach. Remember that as part of the secondary plan, we're kind of looking at this from 10,000 feet, where we don't have a detailed development application in front of us. So we kind of have to assume.
I want to pause here. I think we are veering far away from the development application in front of us. We're considering a development application on Chamberlain, and I think we've spent a significant part of the staff time discussing a policy study that is ongoing and not completed yet. I'm happy to entertain questions for staff about the development application, but I think we've spent enough time considering the
Chair, if I may, I think the applicant has raised it in their suggestion that the height is suitable for Chamberlain, that Chamberlain has certain characteristics that make it acceptable to add the greater height. And what I think we're unearthing here is that there are reasons why Chamberlain may not accommodate greater height in the way that some others are. So I think we're getting very site specific here in terms of how much height can Chamberlain accommodate in this particular location, and that speaks to whether or not the application should be approved or not. I'm finding this very helpful.
I agree as well, but we've heard from a number of from the applicants, from community members, from consultants, from staff. I'm just hoping we can move on if there's any other questions other than the specific height question that we've been dealing with here.
So, Peter, I guess I'll just ask if you can wrap that up. It doesn't sound like you would, in the course of doing what you were doing, have considered 18 stories to be an appropriate height for this part of Chamberlain.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct, Councillor. As part of the height and character study, we reached a conclusion of a maximum of 6 stories. And like I was getting at, that's based on, the question about where to place the start of that 45-degree angular plane. And given the more sensitive condition, for the purpose of the study, I placed it somewhere behind the buildings on Rosebury, which would result in a mid-rise building height. But then, you know, as Steve has brought up, the problem is that we don't have mid-rise guidelines. So we couldn't just leave it at that, because then we could end up with a 9-story bar building all the way across those 70 meters, which would be, you know, frankly, much worse than either the 6-story or the 16, in my opinion. So that's how we ended up with the 6. It is a cautious approach, and it is an approach specifically for a secondary plan, which, you know, doesn't mean it's the only potential solution here. I think that's important. You know, that's why there's a process for individual applications.
Okay. Fair, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Councillor. I'm not seeing any other questions for staff, but we'll give the opportunity for a brief wrap up if anybody wants to. Councillor Menard, I think you have a short presentation you wanted to make.
I'll take like 2 or 3 minutes on a PowerPoint, and then I'll be done. I'll be out of your hair for this one. So thanks very much, Melody, for putting that up there. I'll just put my screen on full screen here and then ask you to go to the next slide. And so what would happen here is, if this application is rejected, we would be working with the applicant and the community to come back to get some development in this area. And we know that can and will occur. It's about what goes up there and how it performs. And so I want to just take you through a few slides. If you can go to the next one. The concern about the secondary plan is that obviously the height and character study, which is going to be a secondary plan, has been going on for a long time. But the concern is that there are aspects of the secondary plan that would be undermined, not just here, but the underpinning of reasons that Peter has used for this area also underpin other areas in the study. And so after the 2-year waiting period, after the new OP is approved, after there's no appeal, that can come back and will very much be used at LPAT for other arguments in other areas of this study, which doesn't just affect this area, it affects other areas in the study as well. If you can go to the next slide. And so the staff positions on good planning have been clear about this previously around the development review staff reaching the same conclusion as the study recommendation that the appropriate built form for the subject site would consist of a modest mid-rise building. We've also heard from staff previously that this should be consistent with the current city-initiated Bank Street in the Glebe height and character study. And we've also heard from staff that a 6-story built form with recessed upper floors would be less impactful in terms of shadowing and privacy in previous iterations. If you can go to the next slide. Obviously, there's been extensive lobbying. We don't have to go through this. There's been a lot of lobbying on this file. I've received an email as part of this list, lots of lobbying going on. And that happens, and communities also go in and they say their piece. But I guess I would just suggest that, you know, a different approach in terms of working together with the local community. We're willing to negotiate on what comes here. That time better spent, I would say. In that way, and we didn't that hasn't really occurred in that way. We haven't had that negotiation where they've been open to a difference here. Whereas I say, you know, there has been a community openness to a different form. You can go to the next slide. And of course, it's not just on the height and character study. The existing policy context under our current official plan seems very clear that it supports a mid-rise building here. And it is our initial analysis through staff that this site was consistent with the height and character study analysis, which would also support a mid-rise. And so I don't need to go into this extensively either, but within our official plan, that 4.11, as Christy has pointed out, there is extensive information that this would support a mid-rise building. Next slide. And here's the difference. Peter has always already laid out many of these, but there's a difference between Rosebury and the Pretoria on the Isabella side versus the Chamberlain side. Here are the key differences on street network, on building stock, land use, and anticipated regeneration or intensification. Next slide, please. And so I guess what we're saying is, look, on this application, I know it's rare, but this is a rare thing that has happened, a large reversal of position. And that doesn't happen very often in public consultations to now. Little changes are made and conditions get updated and smaller changes to buildings, but a very much a complete reversal is an odd thing. And so I'm saying this is an odd time. Let's say to this application, this is not the right time. Go back and work with the community. and the local community association, doesn't support it. Residents aren't in favor. I'm not in favor at this time. The city-driven height and character study and the existing policy under the OP do not seem to support it as well. So let's see that this city and this committee insists that the developer does engage in good faith negotiations under a process we have started already and approve that process underway. So I think with that, Chair, I just want to thank the committee's time. I know it's taken up a lot of our time this morning, but it's important that we get these things right and we have due consideration. So thanks for listening to all of this morning.
Thank you, Councillor. And just because it came up in your presentation, Doug, James, can you just comment on future impact our decision today could have on future studies and policy?
Sure. Thank you, Acting Chair. And Councillor Menard mentioned it there regarding if we allow a taller building here, how will this impact the future secondary plan for the glebe height and character area? Assuming now that Council will pass that, that will create a new policy direction. Right now, we don't have it. That's why I had mentioned earlier that what is happening in that study is not relevant. We have to evaluate the proposal based on the policies that exist today. Once that's passed by Council, it becomes policy. It has the same effect or the same status or the same teeth that the current policy does. In fact, the way that will drive direction for future developments in this area. Like next door that was brought up as well, whether or not you could put a tall building there. Well, it's going to depend on what the secondary plan actually says, because that will give us policy direction to look at and whether or not a tall building should be allowed at where the savings and loan is next door. It's certainly something that this building or this proposal here will not have an effect on the future developments. Once that secondary plan is put in place, it will give us teeth. It will depend on what it says. And of course, someone can apply to amend that secondary plan. That's the way the Planning Act works. But we will evaluate what they're proposing on the policies that will exist once that secondary plan is in place. So allowing something here today will not jeopardize the future of that secondary plan. And if you go to the LPAT, you'll have to look at those policies and whether or not an application is proposal. They just can't point to this property and say, well, you got a 16-story building here, I get one over here. No, what does the secondary plan say? And they'll have to be evaluated against that. So in my opinion, it won't affect the future of that plan at all.
Okay, this has been quite a long discussion.
Chair, I think it's important to say, sorry, I have my hand up as a last comment.
No, you have had your 5 minutes and considerable time in questions.
Yeah,
so
I just would like to rebut what Mr. Mark has said about this as well. So
thank you, Councillor. This is a challenging file. I just want to share a few observations. Councillor Tierney, you had a question earlier about buses. I believe there's a bus line that runs from roughly Dow's Lake to Lees along this site. So there is that transit service there. But this is a really challenging piece of property. It's along Chamberlain and in front of the Queensway. And I think anyone who has had the opportunity to walk, bike, or drive along this site knows that it's can probably see the challenge that other developers or previous owners might have had in considering what could be built here. I think the comment that Mr. Hoban made around, I think he said, stop talking about height and consider more how form and mass have an impact. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind as we're making our decisions here. I do think we need to put aside the Bank Street height and character study since it is still in progress and will be coming to this committee at a later date for consideration, but we do have to consider the application in front of us under the existing policies and bylaws that we have. And also it didn't come up, but I think it's worth noting that there is a significant Section 37 contribution that's being made here. Nearly $1 million that's going towards affordable housing and traffic calming in the local ward. And I think that's a significant benefit to the community as well. We've looked at this from a lot of angles today, so I'd like to call for a vote from committee to make a decision.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
No.
Councillor Lieber.
No.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Cloutier.
Oui.
Councillor,
No.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Councillor Hoopley,
Yes.
Acting Chair,
Yes.
6 yeas, 3 nays.
Okay. Looking at our time, where are we at? We are at 11:53 a.m. We had told folks on the next application, or sorry, pardon me, we told folks on the Carrière Street, the Dome, we'd be starting no earlier than noon. I think it's pretty clear that we'll be starting quite a bit later than noon on that one. I'd like to continue with the third item on the agenda. This is a site plan control for 257 MacArthur Avenue in Rideau Vanier. We have a public delegation and we have the applicant here. So let's begin by going to the delegation. We have Chris Greenshields from the Vanier Community Association. Chris, are you still with us?
He is.
Okay.
Am I on now?
Yes, you are, Chris.
I was disconnected for a minute, sorry.
Welcome. You can go
Thank
ahead.
you. Thank you, Chair. The Vanier Community Association supports this application. We welcome the applicant's intention to relocate within Vanier and to build a new clinic at this site along MacArthur, one of Vanier's traditional main streets. The new facility will maintain veterinarian services in Vanier at the current level of 2 clinics to serve our growing population. The intention to include housing in addition to the clinic facilities is also welcome. The VCA also supports the councillor's comments on the opportunity to include provision for a road modification to permit a cycle track. Our understanding is that it is the city's intention to upgrade the existing cycle lanes to cycle tracks as development proceeds along MacArthur in support of the complete street model. The road modification will also serve to ensure compliance with the Montreal Road District secondary plan, which governs this site to provide for the minimum of 5-meter front yard setback. The VCA considers that it is important to take the local planning context into account, recognizing that as development along MacArthur accelerates, the city has already announced a MacArthur design study as a priority project under the BBRN program. The design study is necessary to ensure that new developments follow suitable design principles for MacArthur and its vicinity, and to respond to the need to improve the public realm as hundreds, literally hundreds of new housing units are built along the corridor from Vanier's western sector east to Saint Laurent. The design study will contribute to the proposed Vanier secondary plan, which the city has confirmed will be presented to council, as well as to complement the new secondary plan already announced for Saint Laurent. Thank you, merci.
Thank you, Chris. Any questions from the committee? Okay, thanks very much, Chris. Our next speaker is Robert Martin, who's representing the applicant.
Good morning, Acting Chair and members of committee. I want to start by thanking city staff for their help and engagement on this file, and for community associations comments. We are appreciative. This is a pretty modest project, and I think the staff recommendation is for acceptance. You know, my comments this morning are you know, in agreement with the staff report, with the exception of one item to do with the raised cycle lane. The existing cycle facility is separated by the use of pylons, and we are proposing to upgrade that with the addition of pinned curbs. The councillor is advocating for a raised cycle track, and you know, this is really problematic for a number of reasons. There was a previous owner. This file goes back to 2019, and in terms of the actual project record, at no point has a cycle track been part of any of those meetings or minutes from those meetings. And we now have a requirement for a cycle track some 5 months after public comment period has elapsed. So we have this addition at a very late stage, and it's extremely problematic. We also understand from city staff that there are technical concerns about the addition of a raised track to do with drainage in the existing area. So it's something we understand city staff are not supportive of either. There's also an assertion that we have to just follow city specifications for a cycle track. These do not exist. We understand from city staff that they are in process and will not be ready for some time. And so this puts us in a situation where, you know, we can't reasonably ask our client to commit to the construction of a cycle track when there are no specifications and data available that we can even begin to design to and cost to. So it's not a reasonable addition to this project at this stage of the development. You know, mostly we see some significant sort of health and safety hazards with a kind of piecemeal approach to MacArthur. As the community association representative had correctly said, there is a design study underway, which will result in the so-called complete street design for this street, much as the city has undertaken with a number of other streets, including Churchill Avenue, Main Street, or even Elgin Street. So the sort of late introduction of this raised cycle track is not particularly helpful. And I should say, our client is extremely supportive of improvements to public realm, and is also supportive of cycling improvements. And in this matter, we are looking to improve cycling facilities, and this should be considered an interim step until the overall design study is undertaken. You know, on this basis, we are asking a planning committee to I guess, approve this application, but with the removal of item 37 for the raised cycle track, and in its place follow what's in the staff report, which is an improvement to cycling facilities resulting from the addition of curbs to the cycle lanes. And that's my respectful request to planning committee this morning, and I thank you for your attention.
Okay, thank you very much. There's a question from Councillor Fleury.
Mr. Chair, two things. First one, I'd like to rectify this idea that this has come last minute. We did meet with the consultant for this property owner, Mr. Paul Robinson, on this application early. We did signify that. There was a former city planner that's now on maternity leave, for which we signify that. We have a number of planning applications on MacArthur, all of which we're asking for cycling track, and the majority are well supportive. In this case, Mr. Martin, I have an email from the property owner, the current applicant, agreeing to the cycling track to a maximum of 50K, which we agree with. So I'm not sure what the purpose of your intervention today, because city staff support it, I support it, the current owners send us an email, we have it on record saying we're okay with that specification up to 50K, which I'm supportive of. So I'm not sure why we're here.
So firstly, we've been told by city staff there's no mechanism where an applicant pay up to a certain amount, and then will the city commit? Let's suppose the cost is $100,000. Will the city pay the remaining $50,000 for this improvement? You know, I mean, that's just not the way things work, to our understanding. And our owner has talked about that. It was largely an attempt to get movement on this file. But when the reality has come through that there are no cycling specifications, there are no city specifications for a cycle track, Councillor Fleury, and the minutes from 2019 onwards, there's not one single item in the minute that talks about raised cycle track. So you may be dealing with other files and other locations, but for this site, neither from your office, there's never been a request for a raised cycle track, and it has come in 5 months after the close of public comments.
Well, we'll agree to disagree. We have written records of that, and we did meet with the owner consultant, Mr. Paul Robinson, and inform them of that. Maybe, Mr. Chair, maybe we can ask city planning staff, because I did work with with Mr. James, and the 50K provision in the site plan did not appear to raise concerns. We've seen that done elsewhere to set a cap limit on a particular application, which I believe city staff are comfortable with.
Yeah, because it's come up in this conversation, just on that item only, Doug, can you clarify this $50,000 upper limit and what that is?
Sure, Acting Chair. The condition as it reads in the staff report and recommendation for the raised cycle track, and it would be from the property line to property line. We're asking not for down the road, but just what we have in front of their property. And we believe we can do that through Section 41 of the Planning Act. And again, it'll probably be one of the last things they do, because the veterinary clinic will go in and we will have design guidelines or design for that and what needs to be constructed specifically, and to take care of there's a catch basin at one end, so it'll be designed to not cause any problems with drainage. But not knowing what it would cost, we put a limit in that condition of $50,000 that the applicant would have to pay towards the design and construction. And outside of that, the money would have to come from the city. They have to come from the city with respect to I don't know the funding source, but beyond that, it becomes our responsibility. So there is an upper limit placed in that condition in site plan.
Councillor Fleur, do you have any other questions for the applicant? No, I'm not seeing any other questions. So thank you, Robert, Councillor Moffat, you just got in under the wire with your hand up.
Yeah, just really quickly, we've done something like this before. I had a developer back in 2011 pay $50,000 or $100,000 towards a pedestrian crosswalk on Bridge Street in Mantic. It turned into a signalized intersection, but ultimately they contributed towards an upset limit toward pedestrian safety, and it was approved by community council, and the city picked up the rest of the bill. So it's not like this doesn't happen before.
Well, just as you know, Councillor Moffat, there's a process for calculating security.
Sorry, that wasn't a question to the delegation. That was just a statement. Okay. So I don't need a response.
Okay. Are there any other questions for the applicant? We'll move to questions for staff. I wanted to just clarify for the committee, Doug, two things. Why is this site plan in front of us? Was it who pulled delegation authority? How did it get here? And what exactly, if we approve the recommendations that are here, can you just be clear about what we're actually approving? Are we approving the cycle track, or I'm not entirely clear on procedurally what we are being asked to approve as part of the report. So if you could clarify that as well, Doug.
Yeah, sure, Acting Chair. It's here because the applicant wishes committee to replace the condition that requires a raised cycling track with one that is just improvements to the flat or level cycling track that's there now. There's some flexi sticks in front of the cycle track in front of this property, but more flexi sticks, say, or some pin curbs. So their request is for the planning committee to be the arbitrator whether or not the raised cycle track gets constructed, because they would not agree to that. It's their preference to have just an improved flat one. And that's why we are here today. They would not concur with the raised cycle track. The second thing is exactly what is as part of their development. We wouldn't just take $50,000 and keep it in the bank. We would ask them to contribute up to $50,000 and actually do the construction as part of the proposal. As I said, it's probably one of the last things they do, but through their development proposal, they would be actually doing the construction and paying up to $50,000 for that.
Okay, thank you. And staff's position, is there a preference from staff on the cycle track versus the curb pins?
Yeah, Acting Chair, our position is the one that's in the staff report, which is for the raised cycle track. And it was mentioned that there are 4 or 5 other applications on MacArthur coming along, and there will be probably for most of them, depending on the situation, obviously, but similar requests of the applicants to do from property line to property line, not beyond, but with the limits of their property line.
Just to add on to Doug, there are 7 applications on MacArthur. If you consider Ralston and I's area. Doug, I know you're busy. I just for sake of committee.
Thanks, Councillor. Councillor Leeper has a question for staff.
So if we vote in favor of the recommendation today, that cycle track will most likely be built at the applicant's cost in front of their property. Perfect. That's
Acting
all,
Chair, that's
just
correct.
clarification. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for staff? Just for clarity for many people who are watching today, I'll call for a vote on this item. Any of the items with delegations we'll do a vote on for clarity. So Melody, if you could assist with that.
Councillor Dudas.
Yes.
Councillor Suds.
Yes.
Councillor Tierney.
Yes.
Councillor Leeper.
Yes.
Councillor Brockington. Councillor Cloutier.
Yes.
Councillor Kitts.
Yes.
Councillor Moffat.
Yes.
Thank you. Councillor Hughley.
Yes.
And Acting Chair.
Yeah.
9 yeas.
Okay, thank you. We're moving on to the next item, which is item 4, official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment 1335 and 1339 Bank Street. We have 4 public delegations and 2 representatives from the applicant. A couple of housekeeping things. After this item, we will take a brief pause just to give people a bit of a break from Zoom. And I'm going to ask Councillor Moffat just to take over as chair for a few moments here. The first delegation is James Russell.
Before I officially assume the chair, I'd like to move the technical amendment as vice chair.
Oh, thank you.
And there is a technical amendment that might be introduced now. I believe the vice chair, the acting vice chair.
That's exactly what I was referring to, Jean.
Got it. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a long meeting. So Vice Chair Moffat.
Thanks. Whereas the report from us recommends approval of an official plan and a zoning bylaw amendment for 1335 and 1339 Bank Street to permit a mixed-use high-rise development. And whereas inconsistencies between the report and document 4 zoning schedule have been identified, therefore be it resolved that document 4 zoning schedule be replaced with the attached revised document 4 zoning schedule revised. And be it further resolved that pursuant to the Planning Act, subsection 3417, no further notice be given. And there's the revised map.
Can I ask staff, because this is relevant, may be relevant to some of the delegations who are presenting, could staff just give a very quick explanation as to what this technical amendment is doing?
Lily, did you want to explain the change in height schedule for lowering the podium to 6 stories?
Certainly, Vice Chair, Acting Chair, and the Vice Chair. The purpose of the technical change was just to make sure the schedule and the report is consistent. It actually does not change the height in meters. In the schedule original version, I was referring to areas A and B as 7 and 8 stories. It's actually 6 and 7 stories. The confusion was due to the internal structure of the building internally, but the look and the feel of the podium would be 6 stories. So we just want to be consistent with the report. It's a fairly minor change.
Okay, thank you. We're going to move on to delegations, and I'll cede the chair to Councillor Moffat for a few moments.
All right, thank you very much. Just be careful, I might not give it back. So we will start with James Russell.
Hi, I am not a professional planner. I am simply a citizen.
Neither am I, so that makes 2 of us.
I must say it has been an education watching today's meeting. I did want to speak about the proposal for 1335 Bank Street, not in any detail, particularly about that particular application, because I think there's a record on it. And there'll be people speaking here on it, and there are a number of people who have spoken against it. I don't think it should go ahead, but you have a record on that. What I'm particularly concerned about is that regardless of how the arguments may go back and forth, that there are going to be people on this committee who might be tempted to think, well, it could be a mistake to go ahead with this. But probably it wouldn't be the city's worst mistake, even the city's worst mistake this year. And it's not going to be in my ward, and it's not in my backyard, and it's not really, really final. So what the heck? But that would be a kind of normal times thinking. And these aren't normal times. And what we really are is in pandemic times. They're chaotic, they're divisive, they're risky. People are uncertain. They want to see basic jobs done well by people who care. And it's not a time to just shirk things off and go with, well, maybe it's a mistake, but okay, we can live with it. Because good government is one of those jobs that really matters when times are pandemic. And good government is what leads us forward and keeps us together in these bad times. So doing it well actually counts. And for these sorts of situations, you are the frontline workers for democracy. And what you do matters for people's belief in democracy and about the shape of the city to come. And that really is your job at this committee, is to shape the city in the long-term interests of its people, not to make ad hoc decisions or short-term decisions for short-term interests. And I think that the issues that are at play in this particular development, as they were in a couple of others that I've listened about this morning, long-term plans or long-term possibilities being foreclosed in favor of immediate decisions on short-term interests. I don't think this particular short-term interest should go ahead. And I really don't think it should go ahead now, because it's a bad time to encourage people to not have faith in government, to think, well, they'll just skip over the big things and make the little deal for a particular person without listening to whether there's going to be a long-term plan, without adjusting for that long-term plan. So I really think that you should bear that in mind as you make your decisions today, because you're the frontline workers. It's a pandemic. Your job is not just making a little decision on a technical matter. It's a decision about the future of the city and whether people can have trust that their representatives are there for the long-term and general good, and not just for the short-term good of one little corner.
1 minute.
That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Russell. We've a question from Councillor Cloutier for you.
Thank you, Acting Chair. Mr. Russell, thank you very much. And thank you for your coming today. I guess I understand what you're saying, and we've heard that in the context of the review of the official plan. As you see today, there are 8, 9, 10 matters before the planning committee, and we have 20 or so planning committees every week. I apologize, every year. Can you tell me what is the particular item with respect to this application at 1335 Bank Street that is of concern? You spoke of short-term versus long-term, and you are absolutely right. I concur. We are making decisions not with a short-term perspective. This has an impact on for 30, 40, 50 years. What are some of the issues that are of concern to you?
Some of the issues are some of the issues that were raised also in respect to the earlier longer discussion on that started with the Rosebury group. It's a question of, for me, this is the first step. There will be another development even bigger right across the street from it. So it's the first step, and it's the first step which would in effect build a wall across the south, between the south part of the city and the north part of the city at Billingsbridge, that the heights that will be argued for will be even more extreme than the ones that are there, even more in violation of all the current plans and the proposed plans. That the excuse for doing this, I'll get back to that in a minute, but in the meantime, it is going to impact all of the neighborhoods around it, not just a couple of streets nearby, but all of the traffic through and by and around there. And it will upset that balance and have running impacts all down and set a precedent for very tall buildings, which would be problematic for quite a number of reasons as time goes by. And we see it in a pandemic. Do people really want to be on the 25th floor of a building when there is a fire? Do they want to have people up there where they can only have air conditioning and you're in a pandemic and you can only go up and down elevators? There are a lot of specific reasons why building a lot of extra high towers to house them right now, to in effect put a block down the middle of the city, don't strike me as being particularly good ideas. Above and beyond that, there are environmental impacts, which I don't think have been really properly considered. And we've just seen this week how in BC, if you don't think well about environmental impacts now, boy, are you going to be paying later on. So all of those things concern me. And I think that they ought to concern you. And I think that the longer term process that frames that idea about what is a proper height and place. I'm sorry, I'm overshooting my time, Mr. Chairman, but I'm trying to respond.
The good thing, Mr. Russell, is when we ask you a question, your time just opens up. You can
okay.
It's added time.
Okay, thank you. But as I said, I'm not a technical specialist on this. I also have had a lot of difficulty in my own mind understanding why apparently staff and proponents for proposals have made a decision that the volume of space that would be occupied under current guidelines, under the current plan, is what should be determinative of the amount of vertical height. I mean, if you could build it one way, then you can build it the other way. And you just sort of take that block and turn it around. And that would be okay if you've got roughly the same density. And I find that difficult to reconcile, the question of density as being a predominant aspect of these things, when I think, well, the city has just incorporated square miles of empty space. And now we're really concerned about making sure that the city is adequately dense. And the only way we can think of to get an adequate density in the city is not to build out on that empty space, but to put up towers in the middle of residential areas. Okay.
All right. Thank you. And Chair, just 30 seconds. You know, you are right. Density versus height. And you talked about empty space. We are always dealing in the environmental impact of sprawl versus densifying. You're absolutely correct. Those are always the considerations that members of this committee, that individual councillors, as we're dealing with these matters, we are always dealing with. Mr. Russell, thank you very much for coming today. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, it's not a juxtaposition that we are looking at more land and increased height. We actually have to do a little bit of both because we can't do all of one right now. Hopefully in the future, we can do all of intensification and no urban expansion. That's the ideal. That's where we try to lead to. Our next speaker is Michelle Haddad. Sorry if it's Michael, but.
I'm not seeing him. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
No, he's not on.
He might be on later. I know Michelle Haddad. I interact with him quite a bit.
He did
Okay,
indicate he might not be able to join. He wasn't sure.
I see.
All right, thank you. Well, I'll move on then to Gary Lindberg, who is the chair of the Alta Vista Community Association Planning Committee.
Hello, greetings,
Lindberg.
Mr. Acting Chair and members of the Planning Committee. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. I'll be brief. We made a brief submission, and I just want to highlight our principal recommendation. We're recommending that the Planning Committee defer taking a decision on this submission until more of the major remaining issues concerning this submission are properly assessed and addressed. In our submission, we referenced the recent Urban Design Review Panel assessment of the proposal, and they recommended major changes to the proposal. But none of these recommendations seem to have been addressed, and we feel they're major enough that trying to deal with them via the site plan control process as recommended is really not workable in our view. We'd also like to note that we sent a submission to the planner in May listing a number of our concerns, and those really haven't been fully addressed or even discussed with us, although we were surprised to find that the Planning Committee response to our concerns was included as part of the submission to your committee. And it now becomes more difficult to discuss it since it's part of this higher level official record. I'll just give you one or two examples. We recognize that there must be intensification and greater heights permitted, especially near nodes such as Belling Bridge. And we participated in the Bank Street Community Design Plan, and these needs were thoroughly examined in that community design plan and the subsequent Bank Street Secondary Plan. And as a result of those considerations, a maximum 50-meter or 16-story height restriction was deemed appropriate for Node 1, that includes the proposal, and AVCA accepted this. Nothing has changed since then in terms of planning for the Belling Bridge area, yet this submission seeks permission to build 26 or 27 stories, and it's not at all clear how we can square those concerns, and we think there needs to be ongoing discussions. Equally, there's a concern between the Bank Street redesign process when we participate in that and see their complete street design, and then suddenly we see the applicant's proposal, which changes significantly the complete street in our judgment, and we haven't been able to have reasonable dialogues about how wide the roadway has to be, how tall the podium should be, how close to the road it should be. So in closing, I'd just like to reiterate that we believe that the decision on this should be deferred until these major issues have been further discussed and resolved. And we feel that they can't be resolved properly through site plan control processes, and therefore they need to be resolved before this application is formally dealt with by your committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lindberg. Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Acting Chair Gary. Thank you very much. I know where you are right now. I appreciate that you took the time to speak to us today. I just want to say I appreciate your work on this, on the official plan, on the Bank Street redesign. And yes, there is still an awful lot of work to be done with respect to site plan process. So I just wanted to say thank you very much, Gary. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And don't sell the site plan process short. It is an ample opportunity to discuss major issues. And yeah, I would encourage you to obviously continue to work on the file with your counselor through that process. So thank you, Mr. Lindberg. I don't see any other questions for you, so appreciate your time today. Our next speaker is Jessica Fullerton.
Jessica had to leave due to a work commitment.
Okay. So we'll move on to the applicant then, which is, we've got two registered speakers on behalf of the applicant. Well, one is the applicant, Kevin McMahon, Park River Properties, and Christine McQuaig with Q9 Planning and Design. I do note that there are other others available to answer questions as well, should there be those questions. Barry Hoban, Michael Paulo and Doug Vandenham, Mark Baker with Parsons, Pierre Goulet also of Park River Properties, Lee Sheets with Novatech, and Scott Mason with CSW. So I will hand it over to, I'm not sure if it's Christine that's going to lead it or Kevin.
I will lead it. Thank you, Melody. Thank you, Acting Chair and Committee. I'm going to start just with a brief background on the project since we acquired it back in 2017. Christine will follow with more of the technical elements of the application. If we can move to the next slide, please. I think everyone's familiar with the site. We are located between along Bank Street up between Riverside and Riverside, 400 meters from the rapid transit station at Billings Bridge. Our initial attraction to the site was proximity to transit, all the walkable amenities in the area, and the long-term vision of what this community can be as it's inevitably redeveloped over time. Next slide, please. The concept that we put together is to create a gateway building that can be a catalyst for change within the community. Originally, we purchased the application. It was a 16-story building, a single tower site on a 12,000 square foot parcel of land. The plan had some significant deficiencies in terms of above grade parking, 2 levels of below grade parking, 2 levels of above grade parking in a parkade, as well as an entrance off Bank Street, an exit and entrance off of Riverside, which was very complicated. Our initial position was to rework the plans, reduce our parking requirement and solve some of the issues. But at the end of the day, we felt that inevitably we were going to build this building and somebody else was going to build a mirror building on the south side of the property, and you'd be left with 2 16-story buildings with a greater density likely than what we are proposing today. So in terms of our next steps, we looked at acquiring the property and putting together a holistic solution, which if we go to the next slide, we can see these are the 2 options. The option on the left is essentially the 2 tower design that we would have been ultimately left with had we built a single tower. And then the design on the right is what is being proposed. We are about 5% below the density that is approved in the secondary plan. And so that's been a topic of discussion. We have presented it many times to the community, to councillors and staff, and we have yet to be, the only response we get is that we're building more density than the site is permitted, and we haven't seen anything to the contrary of our analysis. If we move to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the vision. Our focus on the property is to create something that leverages the quality architecture to create a strong right-of-way and a pedestrian presence that is something where people will feel welcome spending time. We want to meet and improve the functional design that is in the Bank Street Renewal Project. We also really want to focus on creating an active Bank Street by having mixed uses along that corridor that are engaging with the pedestrians walking by. And so that kind of leads us into essentially the high level project details. And I just want to reiterate that our intent with this project is to hold it long-term. We have a long-term vision for this property, and we've invested it into this area because we believe the long-term vision for this area is exceptional for residents, for businesses, as well as guests that come into this area. If we go to the next slide, please. The project has 326 residential units as it stands and 65 short-term stay units that will be operating as a boutique hotel. We will have units that range a mix of studios through 3-bedroom units. The building will feature a ground floor cafe and bar area, a commercial gym, and then there's access to a co-working space as well. Access to and from the site primarily is done through a rear corridor. A major reason for acquiring the adjacent property was to allow a one-way access through the property, which will handle garbage and some of the more technical challenges that exist if we only had access from Bank Street or one side of Riverside.
45 seconds.
Okay. The lay-by is something we will work hard on and work to continue to refine through the site plan process. And I'll pass it over to Christine to carry on from there.
Thank you, Kevin. I was trying to say good morning earlier, but it seems this has taken us into the afternoon. So I'll say good afternoon to Acting Chair and members of the committee. As mentioned, the reason we're at Planning Committee today is seeking an official plan and zoning amendment to permit the increase in height from currently 50 meters or 16 stories to 85 meters or 26 stories to regulate stepbacks of built form through the zoning schedule and identify specifically where that height is being requested on the site. We're also seeking a reduction in the required parking rate for the residential units from 0.5 to 0.3 units. The road widenings being proposed on Bank Street and Riverside Drive account for 11% of the total land area being provided to the city for streetscape and infrastructure improvements. And this is visually represented in that hatched overlay on the proposed zoning schedule to your right. Next slide, please. This is our proposed site plan currently that's in with staff. As noted, along with the improved streetscape being proposed, the ground floor facing Bank Street will have 100% active frontage. Through this redevelopment, we're able to improve the public realm by removing all of the Bank Street accesses that are currently there, incorporating a small lay-by to address wayfinding challenges, thereby reducing conflict in this area, widening the sidewalks over what's current, incorporating the cycle track proposed, providing a bus shelter, a total of 9 street trees, bike lockups along the stretch of bank, planters, a small parkette at the south end in conjunction with the NCC, and a patio at the north end that would be provided with that cafe use as well. Next slide, please. The main objectives here with this design were chiefly to remove those vehicular accesses from Bank Street, and that's accomplished both through the acquisition of the 1339 Bank Street site, as well as with the lay-by being proposed. The design aims to improve functional requirements of a multimodal lifestyle and to provide quality urban design. Next slide, please. Here are some renders of the proposed development where you can see the podium is broken into 3 distinct design palettes with the proposed high-rise component positioned towards the north, as is the intent of the secondary plan. Next slide, please. And that's another render from the south end of the site. Next slide, please. The benefits of this project, it offers a markedly improved Bank Street experience, a range of rental options, as Kevin noted, from studios to 3 bedrooms, as well as the short-term lease component as well. And NCC parkette the south and cafe patio to the north, which will, along with the other components, the bus shelter and the active uses that will sort of bookend the project and create those desirable Main Street experiences that we'd like to see. To close things out, I really want to leave everyone with some key takeaways about this project, and that's that, as stated, what's being proposed is less density than what's currently permitted in zoning. I can explain this in more detail in terms of the analysis, but for the sake of time, I'll skip over the details at this time, but feel free to ask me after. By proposing 1 taller high-rise building instead of 2, because they would both be considered high-rise buildings, there's less shadowing overall, an improved microclimate pedestrian experience at grade, along with more efficient building design. This design also allows for a more dynamic relationship of built form with the proposed development across the street. The high-rise forms are staggered, which will open up the node while still providing the permitted density that is needed to support major rapid transit station. The proposal does require the lay-by for wayfinding purposes, facilitating less reliance on owning a vehicle, and is a really key component to the proposed design with the removal of Bank Street access at this particular location. And this lay-by is something that we have been working on with staff in great detail, the transportation department and our traffic engineers. I just want to restate, I understand it's often the case that an amendment to permit a greater number of stories, the density increases, but that's not the case of this particular project. I can go into further detail on that as I stated, but I will continue with final remarks. Thank you. I can also speak to the measures for this project, which facilitate less reliance on car ownership, which is leading our reduction in parking rate from 0.5 to 0.3 meters for the residential units. But as I mentioned, I will finalize at this time. At the end of the day, the proposal brought before you is mainly asking for additional height, but no additional density, and a reduced parking rate to recognize the features being offered and to acknowledge the location and proximity to major rapid transit in arterial Main Street, and that this will transform the existing east side of Bank Street to an animated public realm and provide needed housing in an appropriate location. Thank you for your time. Again, available to answer questions and receive comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christine. Straight to Councillor questions. We have Councillor Leeper.
Thank you very much, Chair. Christine, Kevin, thank you for the presentation. I do not take issue with the height at this location. The UDRP did have a number of comments that spoke to the design of the building, though, and its mass. I think one aspect of it, it might have been the podium, was referred to as being overwhelming for the site. They suggested even moving the taller portion to the south in order to make it more compatible with what will be a tall development at the neighboring site. Can you take us through any changes that you'd proposed in this final version in response to the UDRP's recommendations?
Through you, Mr. Chair. In terms of the changes that have taken place, I will defer to Barry. If you would like comments with regards to rationale for design on what's being proposed, we can also speak to that, but I can turn it over to Hoban's office with regards to changes for the UDRP on terms of the design itself.
Thanks.
Councillor, I'll make a couple of very quick comments. Doug Vandenham is on this call as well. But first thing, the height of the podium, you notice those amendments to heights basically have been adjusted. There's also the design of the podium, which is further articulated. I would say that there's comments by the UDRP that fall into kind of two groups. One is structural, that is massing, et cetera, and the others are things about treescape or coloration, for instance. For instance, they made a comment that we've chosen a dark expression. They think it should be a light expression. I don't think that's before us now, and we are able to reconsider that. But a couple of really strong comments that really come out that we have addressed. One is the podium, the tower itself is strategically located in this position because it's a yin and yang relationship with what happens across the street. So the notion of shifting the tower to the south actually does create a canyon because we have two buildings right side by side. What we've actually done on the west side is create a parquet at the corner. So this tower benefits from that relief. So it basically, they sort of fit together hand in glove. The other thing is that the tower itself has been reduced in terms of its frontage and its footprint. Frontage being basically how it appears along Bank Street has been shortened, and the footprint basically has been increasingly offset from the north elevation of the podium. So those things were done. There was some work that was done with respect to the internal circulation, how the garbage worked in. So that basically everything happened internally as opposed to externally. There was also a notion about animation and public realm with respect to the southwest corner of the building. And what we did is we redesigned the lobby so it occurred at that corner, and it makes a public space. It didn't turn its back on that corner. Originally, we had dead storage, et cetera, in there. So we actually responded from that perspective as well. I mentioned some comment about the articulation of the podium. That is basically, it's about 6 levels, but in fact, they describe it as being 8. We're actually lower than that because of the way they describe the story. But the actual articulation of the masonry is intended to mimic, to basically go up to 5 levels and then create an offset. And you would know very well that articulation because it actually matches very closely to one of the projects in your ward, which is 1140 Wellington. So those were some of the things that we did. There was some work with garbage and internal things. Some of them were largely driven by site plan. And I would say that there were some pejorative comments about color and texture, which we can continue to manipulate, but they wouldn't be really germane to a rezoning application.
Okay. That's all, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jeffrey. We move to Councillor Menard.
Thanks very much, Chair. Very good to see you again. This application is not in my ward. It's in Councillor Kluge's ward, but it's right on the edge and affects, I'd argue, a larger portion of it, but we're both affected. And certainly the development across the street, there's a 31-story tower proposed and a 34-story tower proposed at this time. Mr. Hoban's also the architect on that one. But that is in my ward, and so there's a big relationship here between what happened in this area. So just wanted to go through a few comments. I had heard that we were going to be seeing a motion for a holding condition. Is that not coming forward today, Chair? Do you have any motion of that sort, or anyone else have a motion of that sort? Because that's what I've been hearing from staff over and over again. There'd be a holding.
I do not have another motion in front of me, just the report that's in front of me, and then the technical amendment that we already heard on the zoning.
Okay. I saw the technical amendment. That doesn't do a holding condition. I guess I'll follow up with staff, or ask. I guess I'm speaking now. Ask staff to email me, please, on what's going on with that, because my understanding was supposed to be a holding condition that comes forward. And I wanted to go through some of the comments that Councillor Leeper had raised around the UDRP. And because the UDRP has raised significant concerns about this, that shouldn't be ignored by us today. And one of them is on the podium, being overwhelming in scale, and that the volume should be reduced and the expression further broken down. So I just wonder, is the applicant doing that? Are you reducing that podium scale and breaking it down further?
Through Acting Chair, I will respond to that comment. With regards to the podium expression, currently there's no zoning limitations that apply to the podium specifically. We have to look to the design guidelines to determine what podium heights are appropriate and applicable. And to that point, the guideline, I don't have it in front of me, I believe it's 2.15, but it essentially states that the max height of a podium for a high-rise building should be equal to the right-of-way width. Our proposed podium at this time is 21.4. The schedule shows 22.6. That's simply flexibility with regards to the ultimate site plan that's approved in construction, et cetera. But the dimension itself is 21.4, and the right-of-way width for this bank street is 30 plus meters, depending on where you are along this stretch. So we are actually 10 meters under what the guideline document recommends for a maximum podium height. Thank you.
I'll just make a quick comment, Councillor. In the UDRP comments, which I have in front of me, they refer to a podium that's 8 stories, and there's some confusion about what that actual height is. So that's what the technical amendment basically would basically, the 3-dimensional diagram for the zoning actually reflects a lower podium. In terms of exterior expression, the expression of the base is broken down into 3 components. And really, the building that I referenced, which is closest to the podium, is the building that's in Councillor Leeper's ward, which is 1140 Wellington. It may appear in some of our other visual material. There is a focus on making that podium highly articulated. The ground floor is quite high. It's to animate the street, as Kevin has responded to. One of the levels in our podium is actually it's a mezzanine level set aside for bicycle parking. It's not really a story. And I think it's important, actually, since you are the council on the other side of the ward, to understand how these two things fit together. Because I think one of the gentlemen mentioned about 2 projects coming together, creating a canyon effect. The reality is it's not like that at all. This podium actually holds the east side of the street. And on the west side, it opens up into a parquet, and the single tower, which is on the south end. The tower at the south end basically matches the south end of our podium. So there is some yin and yang connection between these 2 projects. Serendipitously, I mean, we will discuss the other one at length, but in terms of what the ultimate design is, but basically they speak to each other, and they're not meant to create a canyon where one is on top of the other. I know Doug Van Hen's on the call. He should. There were some comments as well about the whole street, complete street, strategy with respect to cycling, sidewalk, all of those things, which basically we have actually responded to.
Did you want me to wait for Doug, or should I continue on?
I don't know if he's been.
I can comment.
Allowed in.
I am actually allowed in, yes. I'll comment really briefly on just on the streetscape side of things. We have had the privilege of being able to work with CSW on the streetscape side, and they have some internal advantage to knowing what's going on Bank Street. And so that has been a fairly collaborative approach in terms of trying to find positions to add in additional trees in response to those UDRP comments in coordination with the existing below grade and proposed below grade services. Through that process, we've also come to a better solution for the bus stop and the cycle track, sliding the cycle track behind the bus stop away from being between the bus stop and the curb line as was in the original UDRP package. And so, you know, while that's still an ongoing process working with the Bank Street redesign, we've come to I think we've come to a proposal right now that incorporates all of the desired elements of the Bank Street redesign and works well with the proposed building frontage and animation that our building is going to add on to that street. Obviously, as that Bank Street redesign continues on, we're still seeking more opportunities to provide a little bit more green into that. But that all has to be kind of negotiated in conjunction with Hydro and also with that Bank Street redesign process. So.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, I still have concerns about the lay-by there. To be honest with you, those conditions can be difficult. And I know you've reduced it, I think, by 1 car length instead of 4. It's three spots now. But still having a lay-by right there on Bank Street, knowing that area very, very well and the dangers in that area still remains a concern for me, especially with the frontage here and the need for a very wide pedestrian and cycling realm with across from buildings that are 26 stories, 31 and 34. We should really be having at least a 5-meter sidewalk throughout this area. And I've been making the same comments to the city throughout this process. So the other piece that the UDRP recommends is that you would get a legal agreement with the neighboring landowner. So I'm just wondering, has that been done in terms of securing a limiting distance, air rights, or other type of agreement with the landowner in terms of the appropriateness of the tower form to ensure the quality of life of the residents that are going to be living in the development? Is that something that's has occurred?
I assume you're referring to the PEB building property?
The application in front of us now with a legal agreement with the one right across the street.
Across the street.
34. Yeah.
Mr. Chair, is that question directed at staff or to myself as the applicant?
I believe it's directed to the applicant.
Okay. So with regards to a limiting distance agreement, that is chiefly an Ontario Building Code requirement in certain situations and can be addressed at that point as or if needed. And with regards to the proximity to the PEB building specifically, the site is large enough to offer the density that is planned for it and remove those accesses from Bank Street as well, but it does have a narrow depth and the placement of built form has limitations in where that can occur. We will note that this proposal does offer a greater setback from that rear line from the previous proposal that went through site plan control with the city back in 2018. And further, the zoning schedule that's before you ensures that the abutting property will have that flexibility in any future tower setback for over half of the site at the shared lot line. This site also benefits from a parcel shape that's conducive to a variety of development options, and given the way the NCC land wraps around that space, the logical placement of buildings would be towards that existing green space. So as Barry was referring to a sort of yin and yang with this proposal and the one on the west side of Bank Street, that would also be the case for this proposal as well as the one that is to the east of us, just in terms of how the parcels are shaped and the way our zoning schedule is set up. It's done in such a way that it would not inhibit the development of that site and create conflicts between these two. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. Yeah, and that's my concern is we don't want to create sort of a tunnel effect through here. These are huge developments with adding a lot of folks in this area. We need density. We need to do this right, of course. But the comments of the UDRP are very relevant here, where they're talking about too much pressure on the surrounding public lands, given the density, and that they say the density should be reduced, and more should be given back in terms of public realm treatment. And you know, in all of our public discussions on this, those are comments that came out over and over again as well in public feedback. So it is a you know, it is a concern for me going forward, which is why the holding provision was so important, Chair. And I had heard from the councillor and from city staff that was coming. So I'd like to put forward that holding provision if it hasn't already been done at some point, or is not in the process of being done, because there's a lot here to negotiate still on the Ottawa South Bank Street renewal, as well as a potential change in street configuration. Riverside is being looked at right now. This is an island with Riverside, east and west, and there's a potential that those could be combined in the future.
Yeah, so I understand that there is, I mean, there's one holding provision on the site as it pertains to servicing, but I can allow Ms. Sneddon to make reference to the other holding provision that was or something added to that holding provision, which I believe was resolved, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Acting Chair. We had some further discussions this week, and we didn't feel that the additional holding was necessary. We'll be providing some conditions to the site plan process in order to condition the applicant with respect to obtaining a letter from the abutting landowner to be able to get permission to move forward. And we've also discussed that there was a conversation around the podium height, and we resolved that within the motion that you had before you today with respect to changes to the 6 stories within that zoning schedule. So we didn't feel that there was anything further necessary that we couldn't condition through the site plan process with respect to the holding. No one's going to be obtaining a building permit until such time as the site plan control process has been completed. And we didn't see the need or the necessity to double shrink wrap the site plan process. Thank you, Acting Chair.
Okay, thanks, Chair. It's disappointing because I just was told, I think yesterday or the day before, that was coming, and that was what gave me comfort at this point. And because there's a lot at work here. It's not just, it's the Riverside potential change. It is the Bank Street South renewal and the design that's been completed there. It is the towers across the street, and of course our new official plan. And so there's a lot of pieces moving here. And then the UDRP comments, the UDRP comments are very negative. They do not think that this should go forward at this time. They think that we should be holding off on this, which is why the holding provision for me gave me more comfort in saying, yes, we want some of this type of development, but let's make sure we're getting it right and come back to these pieces that they are commenting on. And we haven't seen a major change from the applicant on a number of areas the UDRP has commented on. So I know I'm commenting on this rather than asking questions, and we're not at that point. So I guess I'll leave it there for now, Chair, but I think we really should be considering a holding position. And I think, you know, staff should reconsider that, given that we just talked about this a couple of days ago, that would be coming.
Okay, thank you. I know one of the representatives of the applicant has their hand up. I can't go to you. That's not how the process works. If there was a direct question, I could have done that, but I can't acknowledge that, unfortunately. Any other questions for the applicant? Seeing none, thank you for that. Do we have questions for staff on, I believe it's Kelby Unseth is the planner on this, and I see Lily Jus here as well. Questions for staff on this application? Councillor Leeper.
Thanks. I do just want to best understand how this building is going to relate to a future complete street treatment on this portion of Bank Street. If it's passed in its current form, and if the site plan goes through that looks something like the site plan that was included with the application files, I'm curious to hear from staff whether we are constraining ourselves with respect to an ideal state for Bank Street moving forward.
Thank you, Councillor and the Acting Chair. So the Bank Street renewal project by the city is ongoing, and the site plan review will be reviewed at the same time as the with the consideration of the Bank Street renewal project, and we're fully aware of that. Two teams has been working closely on that part. So I'm not sure that answers your question, Councillor.
Yeah, the zoning would approve certain setbacks from the right of way, and I don't want to vote in favor of a proposal that leaves inadequate setbacks to the right of way or to the property line, if that is going to constrain the flexibility that staff have in future to design an optimal cycle track.
Thank you, Councillor, for the clarification. No, staff do not believe it will restrict the Bank Street renewal, including the addition of the cycle track.
How much road are we, or how much are we taking on this one? Or are we?
Approximately from 4 to 4.5 meters along Bank Street.
Okay. Okay, I see Sean probably wants to get in there, so I'll listen to his comments. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. But did you? Oh, there you are, Councilor Menard.
Thanks, Chair.
You took the hand down. I'm like, well, maybe you just didn't want to talk anymore.
Yeah, I don't really want to talk anymore, to be honest with you. But the concern I'm having is the, again, zoning provisions that we're going to approve potentially today without the holding. So just walk me through and help me understand. If for some reason we have a change in the street on Bank Street where the design changes and we want to take more space for a sidewalk from the property, would we be allowed to do that after approving this today?
Thank you, Councillor and Acting Chair. The right-of-way dedication is collected through the site plan process. So it's until the site plan time and we take the land from the right-of-way for the right-of-way purpose. So yes, we could potentially.
We could potentially, okay. And what about if there's a change in Riverside Drive in the future? Could that also be changed, given that the building may need to shift northbound to accommodate the southbound, the southern portion of a Riverside Drive combination?
So similarly, Councillor, hypothetically, yes, provided the site plan is not approved, and I imagine would be subject to the negotiation between the city and the transportation services with the landowners to obtain the land if it is required more than what is required today.
Okay, and what about inclusionary zoning? Is that, I know we have that coming in the official plan. This is 400 meters to a transit station, hundreds of units. So is it possible to say they'll be subject to inclusionary zoning? I know they're going to go through CMHC and do the whole low interest loan thing, but which doesn't result in deeply affordable housing. But is it possible to say that this would be subject to inclusionary zoning in the future?
Mr. Acting Chair, I would like maybe Mr. Mark to respond just with respect to timing of policies in terms of when an application is approved versus future potential policies with respect to inclusionary zoning. Mr. Mark?
Mr. Acting Chair, yes, as I noted earlier in response to the first matter today, this application has already been filed. It's before committee today. And so policies in the future will not apply to it.
It's a shame because, you know, there's a lot of units here. We're 400 meters within Billings Bridge, major transit hub in the city of Ottawa. And, you know, we're striving for more affordable housing, certainly needed in that area as well. I wonder how staff, because I asked how the applicant is responding to the different provisions here within the UDRP and what their comments were. The panel was very clear that this should not be approved right now. They were extremely clear that the proposal gives too little back in public realm, that the podium of the project's overwhelming in scale, and that the appropriateness of the site of a tower form without securing those other legal agreements would not be appropriate, and that the proposal couldn't be supported as currently proposed, given the height of the tower and the lack of separation distance being the primary concern. So I wonder what staff's response is to the UDRP's comments.
Mr. Acting Chair, maybe if I can, the Urban Design Review Panel are comments that we certainly take into consideration. I would, you know, the applicant, I think, is described in some ways in which that they have responded to the feedback from the Urban Design Review Panel. We will certainly continue to work and negotiate with the applicant as we move forward through to the site plan process, where we will continue those discussions. You're right, Councillor, they are important considerations, and we do believe that we can continue that dialogue, given that this is an initial process and we still have site plan to get through. But I'll ask Ms. Hugh or Kelby if they wanted to provide further comments around that.
Thank you, Leanne. So we understand the UDRP provided comments, extensive comments on the design of the building, not necessarily saying we shouldn't approve the proposal, but with many comments. Some of the comments could be addressed through the site plan process. I just want to add one thing about the podium height. That was mentioned earlier and also noted in the UDRP comments. So UDRP comments on the podium height was one of the considerations when we are reviewing this application, because it is implemented in the zoning and the zoning schedule. There are other guidelines, as the applicant has argued, with regards to what is appropriate height for the podium, and lots of the considerations were including the context of the site, surrounding buildings, and adjacent and new and existing buildings, and as well as the right way of the major arterial road that is adjacent to it. So with all those in consideration, staff has a confidence that we could achieve improve the quality of the public realm and the streetscape with a 6-story podium. That's why we're supporting it.
Yeah, I guess I think UDRP was likely referring to the total massing of that, and the height in meters, not necessarily strictly on the stories, but the actual metered height. So we're not reducing that; we're just correcting the stories, right? The meters aren't changing. So, am I correct on that? The same height exists. Okay. So I guess the last question, Chair, is just, I just want to be sure in the future, if I come back and say, okay, we've got something on Riverside that's going to work for a combination of those 2 roads south of this, we're not going to be in a negative position by not having a holding provision. We're not going to be in a negative position by not having a holding provision for the Billings Bridge changes that are needed. I know this is separate. City project has to do that, but right now there's nothing planned for there. We've had deaths in that area. It's very unsafe on that intersection. We've had 200 accidents in the last 5 years in this stretch of Bank Street between the 2 Riverside areas. I want to make sure that without a holding provision, all of those pieces are still going to be addressed, and we're not going to get something that comes back and says, well, we can't address it because we've already approved this application as it is.
Was that a question?
Yes. Yeah.
2?
I guess to Lily or Leanne. I mean, I want to make sure all those things are I don't want to have to come back and say, okay, we can't do those things now because we've approved this. But if we had a holding condition, we could have. And so that's the piece I'm really seized with right now.
Mr. Acting Chair, all comments are on record here today, and we will definitely take direction in terms of ensuring that these concerns are addressed through our site plan review process, and there will be conditions, I'm sure a lot of conditions through that process to ensure that what we're building here or what the applicant is building here will be will be a great addition to the community. So certainly, Councillor, we've definitely understood the feedback, and we will undertake through the site plan review process.
Thanks. Just out of curiosity, who owns 2193 Riverside Drive? That's the small sliver of land that runs along. Because Councilor Menard's talking about the width of Riverside Drive on the south side of the building, but it looks like there's a bit of a swath of land that's
NCC,
likely
I think,
publicly owned.
Mr. Acting Chair. I think it's NCC.
Okay, so if there was improvements that Councilor Menard's referring to, there is the opportunity to work with the city, between the city and the NCC, on widening that allowance if you wanted to actually add some more active space in there, correct? Would that be accurate then?
I think we need more than that, Chair, with all respect, but yes, that is one portion of it, certainly.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it's 25-meter allowance. I mean, if you take in the NCC space, it's 25 meters. But
the combination of two roads into one with a large need for access. So it is, the designs we've seen are beyond that slightly. So.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any further questions for staff on this matter? Seeing none. Just bring the recommendation up here. So just
can I wrap?
Oh yeah, sorry, of course. Yeah, of course. Go ahead, wrap up.
Okay. I'd have one more question too. If that's okay.
Well, I'll let you ask your question first.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Chair. There is.
You already said you had one more question, so I didn't think there'd be. I have one more question after saying I have one more question.
I know. It keep coming up, but there is a secondary plan in this area, and I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we often have secondary plans, and this one is not that old either. We just had one where we don't have a secondary plan approved yet, and we made a decision on Chamberlain, and this one has a secondary plan, and it calls for significant density and height in this area. Same with across the street. This is going beyond that, of course. And I would be remiss if I didn't say that the community takes the time to plan these pieces out, talks about density. They've talked about this type of height further south on Bank Street. Not to not have it, but again, it's the placement of it. And UDRP's comments go directly to that point. They are backing the community up in essentially the exact same way. And so this is, again, another instance where we have a secondary plan properly planned out that increases density and height, and the community supports it, and we're going against that. And so I have concerns about the holding provision not being there for the very reasons we've talked about already.
Yes, you've made that clear.
I know this is going to be probably approved today, but this is the type of thing that I've been raising for 6 months now, over and over again. At public comments and in written emails to say that we need to sort these pieces out, and we haven't sorted them out. So I'm not sure what else we can do except for raise the issues and have the public raise them over and over again. But here we are again.
Thanks, Councillor Cloutier.
Thank you, Acting Chair. And thank you, colleagues, for and the delegations that presented today. And today, what we're approving is an official plan amendment with respect to height and reduced parking. And I am supportive of this application. The height does not change the density that is permitted on the site. The height improves. Councillor Menard referred to the wall thing. The taller tower reduces the wall issue. Limited parking, it brings more residents. Within the vicinity of the Billingsbridge Transit Hub, a very busy transit hub. And it'll encourage the use of transit and cycling and active transportation. And that's what the limited parking does. And I'm supportive of that. Like I said, like we've all said, we know it's adjacent to the Billingsbridge Mall, the BRT station, traditional Bank Street to the north in Councillor Menard's ward, arterial Bank Street to the south, great cycling facilities along the Rideau River, proximate to employment centers, downtown, Carlton U, Ottawa Hospital. And, my primary concern is regarding traffic and how it relates to the pedestrian and the cycling facilities. And And I think what the proponents said in their presentation, I absolutely supported the changes to remove access and egress on Bank Street. I think it makes it safer. We are about to enter detailed design to renew Bank Street. The renewal will be in the long term, over the next 5-7 years, perhaps longer, and we want to improve the pedestrian and the cycling safety in the public realm and the experience on Bank Street for businesses, for pedestrians, for residents. Absolutely, the safety at the corner of Bank and Riverside is a primary concern. Also on the Billings Bridge, and I've worked with Councillor Menard with staff to improve what can be done with respect to the Billings Bridge itself, that bridge that connects north and south Bank Street as it crosses the Rideau River. This site and the future development in Councillor Menard's ward at 1346 Bank will take advantage again of the close proximity of transit and the transportation network. The density here will reduce cut-through traffic that comes from the south, and I would encourage staff to consider any and all opportunities to create a safer connection, a safer situation on Riverside, on Billings Bridge for all road users, given the increase in population and the usage of it. And I do want to commend staff and express my appreciation of staff for their work across a whole bunch of departments: planning, transportation, public works, CDPs and secondary plans, working with my office in the last 3 years of work with respect to this application. And I recognize that there are unresolved issues on this file, and that will be made more complex with respect to the application at 1346 Bank Street in Capitol Ward. There's a lot happening in the area. And of course, the Bank Street redesign, still a lot of conversations to have. It's a busy corner and a lot of challenges. We need to get it right. And so with that, thank you. I've spoken enough, Chair. Thank you all for your work today. And I appreciate the submissions by our community associations and our residents. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. I'll just say this: I missed the Harveys. I had many a grilled hot dog at that Harveys in my media reading days. So the item before us, that Planning Committee recommend Council approve an amendment to the official plan, Volume 2A, Bank Street Secondary Plan for 1335 and 1339 Bank Street with site-specific policies, increased building height as detailed in Document 2, and B, an amendment to the zoning bylaw 2008-250 for 1335 and 1339 Bank Street to permit a mixed-use high-rise development as detailed in Document 3, and 2, that Planning Committee approve the consultation details section of this report. So we'll do yeas and nays.
Chair, on the technical amendment first.
On the technical amendment, is that approved?
Carried.
Carried on technical.
So, as amended, yeas and nays.
Councillor Dudas?
Yes.
Councillor Suds?
Yes.
Councillor Tierney?
Yes.
Councillor Leeper?
Yes.
Councillor Brockington? Councillor Cloutier?
Yes.
Councillor Kitts?
Yes.
Councillor Hughley?
Yes.
Vice Chair Gower?
Yep.
Acting Chair Moffat?
Yes.
Thank you.
With that,
9
I'll hand it
yeas.
back to Councillor Gower, who will then toss us into a break.
Thank you, Councillor Moffat. Okay, so we have three major items left: 403 Richmond Road, 19 Centrepoint Drive, and then the Dome on Carrière. So we will take a 15-minute pause and come back for about 1:30 p.m. Please take the opportunity to stretch your legs, get something to eat, and come back refreshed and ready to go for a few more hours. Thank you.
Thank you all.